The Majority Report with Sam Cedar, where every day's Casual Friday. That means Monday is Casual Monday, Tuesday, Casual Tuesday, Wednesday, Casual Hump Day, Thursday, Casual Thurs, that's what we call it, and Friday, Casual Shabbat. The Majority Report with Sam Cedar.
It is Friday, March 8th, 2019. My name is Sam Cedar. This is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, Ben Dixon, host and proprietor of The Benjamin Dixon Show. Also on the program today, Paul Manafort gets 46 months in the clink. And that's just his first sentence, ladies and gentlemen. Part 2 coming up shortly. Meanwhile, Donald Trump turns out to have hosted the former owner of the sex trafficking massage parlor where Bob Kraft got busted. Coincidence.
Fake tugs. Fake tugs. I didn't start anything with the wife.
Democrats in the House pass one of the largest voting and ethics reform bills maybe in decades. And 23 Republicans vote against a resolution condemning hate. Meanwhile, the Pentagon asked to warehouse up to 5,000 detained migrant children as the White House plans to drain military pensions to build the wall. Elizabeth Warren releases a plan to break up Amazon, Google, and Facebook. Doesn't involve prison sentences for under the Sherman Act, but still pretty good. Mitch McConnell prepping a new nuclear option to speed up confirmation of right-wing judges. No word yet if it involves blowing up the moon and having its pieces fall into Lake Michigan. And someone in the White House is leaking stuff about Javanka to Democratic investigative committees. And lastly, Chelsea Manning sent to jail for refusing to testify in the U.S. government's WikiLeaks case. All this and more on today's program, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us. Another week has passed. I don't know what to tell you. We are still here, barely.
We did it.
It's amazing in this era, but a week goes by and it feels like we were on vacation like 6 years ago. So much.
Yeah, I feel that way, and I was on vacation last weekend.
Like this week, actually.
Yeah. Up until Monday.
Up until Tuesday. Well, let's not get technical about these things, folks. But nevertheless, yes, it's another crazy. No, I'm not getting. It's all just about accuracy. I'm trying to make a point. But another crazy week, and it's going to get worse, folks. Let me just touch on this McConnell thing, because sometimes stories like this get lost, and certainly. I'm not going to go into a long diatribe about Jimmy Dore or other people who are just not bright enough to understand the implications of having a Republican executive in office in a Republican-controlled Senate. There's not going to be any legislation that gets passed over the next 2 years, 18 months, 2 years, that is going to be particularly horrific. There may be some corporatist ones that get passed that do so with a little fanfare that we may not like, but there's not going to be any huge tax cuts for the wealthy again. There's not going to be a rollback of the ACA, although it will happen administratively in some sectors. There's not going to be cuts to Medicare. There's not going to be cuts to Social Security. There's not going to be Social Security privatization. However, what has happened in the Senate and will continue to happen in the Senate, and at a pace that is even greater than it's been, will be the wholesale monopolization of the far right of our judiciary for decades to come. Decades to come. If we are extremely lucky, the worst that will happen about the Supreme Court from now until 2020 will be that a 70-some-odd-year-old conservative is replaced by a 45-year-old conservative. So that seat will not come up for grabs for another 30 years. And if you look at the conservatives on the court, that majority of 5 will be there until I am probably too old to speak into this microphone and be legible and understood. Huge missed opportunity, obviously, with the Garland thing. I mean, it wasn't, putting aside that Garland was not the pick that I would have chosen. But Kennedy and maybe Thomas I would imagine Thomas is going to announce his resignation pretty soon. That would be my guess.
Yeah.
They're going to want to get him out of the way. Although McConnell may not, it certainly will not slow things down because it's 9 months till an election, whatever it is. But Roberts is probably going to be the next out unless something tragic happens and one of the 4 on the left side of the court, I guess, the liberal side of the court, has to resign. And even these 4 are not, they are to the right of nearly everyone who sat on that court, supposedly in the left seats 30 years ago. But nevertheless, the other aspect of the judiciary is not just the Supreme Court. It is the Federal Court of Appeals in various districts, circuits around the country. And Trump has filled these spots at a pace that is completely unprecedented, at least in the last 4 or 5 presidents, so 30, 40 years, at least. And they are as radical as maybe we've seen in the modern era. They are much more reminiscent of justices that we would have seen in the 1890s, let's say, or the early 1900s. Who viewed such things as Social Security as unconstitutional. I mean, these people are extremely radical. They come in slightly different flavors. Some are convinced that we are now living in a full-on socialistic, communistic state. Others think that we're living in too profane of a world, and they're theocrats. But they're all extremely radical on the conservative end. And what Mitch McConnell has done is he got rid of the filibuster when it came to the Supreme Court justices. Completely predictable, although some people thought it was equivalent to the moon falling in Lake Michigan. Completely predictable. And Mitch McConnell also got rid of blue slips, which was a rule that basically said a senator from any given state could basically refuse to give their sign-off for a judicial nominee in that circuit that includes their state and prevent a lot of judges from sitting on that court. The Republicans used this throughout the Obama administration, repeatedly. Kept a lot of judges off the court. McConnell no longer recognizes that practice. The latest reporting is that McConnell will now invoke a new nuclear option by reducing the amount of time for debate over district-level judicial nominees from 30 hours to 2. So one of the ways that Democrats have tried to slow McConnell's role here, and particularly since Chuck Schumer was basically told, I think, by his caucus, you got to stop making these deals that allow all of them to walk through, that they would require 30 hours of debate. And, 30 hours of debate, it's not from this morning at 10 a.m. till tomorrow at 4 p.m. It is 30 hours in which the Senate is in session. And on any given week, there may only be 30 hours of session time period. Probably, I don't know, maybe even less. And so this slows the pace in which judges can be confirmed. However, if you change the rules, which McConnell can do with a simple majority vote, that will basically just make it the path to confirming all these much easier. So this is going to be, highly problematic for my kids. That's how long the impact of this is going to be.
As far as I'm concerned, court packing should be a question asked of every single presidential candidate right now.
The problem is, and Eric Holder actually came out in favor of that today. I think ultimately court packing will bring about hopefully some reform with the Supreme Court on 18 years. But it's unlikely, and it's possible the Senate could add, to the circuit courts around the country. Certainly the Republicans were trying to reverse that. During the Obama administration, they tried to eliminate 3 positions on the D.C. Circuit Court so that Republicans could maintain their parity with the number of Democrats on there because there was 3 or 4 vacancies. It's conceivable that but it's not just for presidents, right? This would be for Democratic senators. Will you vote to expand the number of judges on these circuit courts? But it becomes you're opening a can of worms. The best thing to do is to win elections consistently over time, and make sure that you have the ability to vote for these to confirm these judicial nominees. And frankly, the left does a very bad job because they don't seem to understand the importance of the judiciary as exemplified by people who poo-poo it. There is nothing akin to the Federalist Society in terms of basically training and reproducing these judicial candidates and providing on day one the president with a list. Here's 50 people who should be getting the first 50 circuit court or district court appointees, and here's a list of people on the Supreme Court. It is just simply that the left, broadly speaking, doesn't take this stuff terribly seriously. I think that's going to change over the next 15, 20 years when they start to realize, nothing we pass.
Oh, it's changing now, I think, already.
I think there are plenty of people on the left who take it seriously. I think there are structural barriers to it, and maybe some people didn't take it as seriously as they should have, but it's more complex than that.
But it takes, people can say I take it seriously, but it takes literally, decades to build an infrastructure. And when Cenk Uygur was a young lawyer, 25 years ago, I think he was a member of the Federalist Society, right? There is no equivalent on the left. And I'm not just talking about, voters or the commentariat. Also, institutionally, there needs to be more appreciation on the left of the judiciary. That will happen. It's going to take 10 years from now when we have, President
Ilhan Omar.
Ilhan Omar trying to,
She is the new stand-in. I don't care, by the way, if whatever the amendment is that bars her, but she's my new ideal stand-in.
Right.
It's no longer AOC.
Right.
It's President Ilhan Omar.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll change the rules.
Whoever it is as president there, when they start to pass the Sharia laws and the
So I've been working for.
the court says you can't pass that this is unconstitutional. That's when I think you're going to see a lot more
We
activity.
packed the court so we can implement Sharia.
Right.
Nice.
Right.
Yeah, well,
Awesome.
Court packing and term limits are two shorter term solutions to the damage that's been done to the judiciary.
I'm importing
And we
the
need to
Grand
keep
Mufti
all the
from
options on
Egypt.
the table.
All right, let's turn to this before we get to Ben Dixon. I have to tell you that I know there are times where I don't get too emotional in situations like this, but I found this really moving. Meghan McCain has been taking Ilhan Omar's comments, and it has been really devastating for her.
Can I just ask
We
before
know
we do this?
all the things that are said and go back and forth, and Meghan has been really, really strong, throughout this entire period where we have seen such an increase in hate groups and in physical violence and by the right, and she has been a real trooper. But this,
She's never prevaricated. I mean, any single instance, whether it's Trump or whether it's an incident
I'm just saying
in
that
public,
she has been totally bucking up.
consistently
Bucking.
100% opposed to all forms of bigotry.
But she's just hit her limit with what's happened with Ilhan Omar.
When
Can I just
we
say
had
really
Barry,
quick?
no, let me just finish. When we had Barry Weiss on as an expert in what is anti-Semitic and what isn't, I asked her, is it okay to talk about Israel's policies and not be called anti-Semitic?
And she said
and
yes.
she said yes. She said where it crosses the line is when you say that Israel does not have the right to exist. That is when it crosses the line. Now, Omar
not
has
saying
never
that.
suggested
No.
that Israel does not have the right
But
to
can I
exist.
say what she has
So,
said?
to
Yeah,
me,
give us a minute. Let her
it seems
finish.
to me that Republicans are trying to use this as a wedge issue.
I'm really not.
And I think that
Not you. I'm not talking about you.
This
talking
selective
about the
outrage
party.
is kind of crazy because I don't think that the Republicans have moral high ground here.
But it seems like Democrats
I think
are upset
that
too,
Kevin
though.
McCarthy has
just
used
Republicans.
these anti-Semitic tropes. I think that Jim Jordan just recently,
And I
tweeted
call that
this
out.
Against Tom Steyer.
and
Right.
remember that Ilhan Omar in the West Virginia Republican Party just had this huge poster superimposed with her face with 9/11 terrorists, and I haven't heard any outrage about that coming from the Republican Party. And all that to say is that this selective outrage, and I will tell you, I take this very personally as a woman of color who has been the subject of so much bigotry. And what a lot of people don't know is that my grandfather is Jewish. He is a Sephardic Jew. And so I have, my family members have received a lot of bigotry. So,
But I know Joe Lieberman.
I've experienced firsthand in my family anti-Semitism and bigotry for being black. And so I just, this whole, thing,
Sonny,
I think it's just a
could I just
distraction.
let
All right,
her
pause it
answer?
for 1 second. That is Sonny Hostin, who is now like my favorite daytime talk show.
You are such a
speaker.
relentless,
There you
self-hating Jew.
Comfortable with me speaking now?
Hey, pause it. Well, you got to go back because really, now so Meghan is trying to interrupt Sonny throughout this, and she can't. And even Abby Huntsman was trying to interrupt Sonny throughout this, and she can't. Sonny just blew through her. And so I have a feeling the fact that Meghan was, feels ganged up on by Joy and Sonny. I mean, this is so silly that we're talking about this, but millions of people get their perspective on these things through this. I mean, The View is so much more effective in getting a political message across than this program that it is impossible for me to even contemplate. So this stuff is relevant. And so Sonny and Joy are basically, taking the lead here. And I think that's as much of a reason why Meghan McCain gets so emotional here than anything else. Watch this.
And so I just, this whole, thing,
Sonny,
I think it's just a distraction.
Are you comfortable with me speaking now?
Letting someone
Are we
finish
comfortable
feels
with
like
me
being
rebutting now?
interrupted. To
Yes.
her.
Okay. So she also said Israel has hypnotized the world, suggested that Jews in Israel have bought U.S. politicians all about the Benjamins, implied that American Jews have divided loyalties, and it's okay for people to push allegiance to
Pause it. None of this is true. The only thing she did say was that Israel has hypnotized the world. And I would take issue with the word hypnotized, because really what they have done is sent out squads of former Mossad agents in private organizations to change and to intimidate, literally to intimidate people who critique Israel in this country. That's not hypnosis. In many respects, it's worse. And this is something that she tweeted in 2012, deleted, and apologized for. And frankly, I got to tell you, it may be inappropriate language for a congressperson, because you're in a, I tell my son, hey, we're at a restaurant. Don't keep talking about your penis, because not that there's anything wrong with your penis, but just it's just, there are things that are more appropriate in other situations. At home, you can talk about it with me if you want.
Yeah, English is like her third language. So it's not on her if she didn't know the association with that word.
But even if she meant it as she did, the reality is we know that there is, and I personally know this, and I mentioned this the other day, Israel is extremely aggressive in dealing with their critics, and from whether I was on a radio show and I get contacted from the Israeli embassy the next day I critique Israel, or whether they're sending out former Mossad agents to harass people. And this is all well documented. I mean, there was a story this past week in it. So, but everything else she says about the dual loyalties and referring to Jews simply did not happen. This is getting your news from the Daily Caller and their interpretation of what she said.
Allegiance to a foreign country. I again say, why this obsession with Jerusalem and Israel? Why this obsession with this specific area of the country? And as you said,
pause it. She also is a huge critic of Saudi Arabia, which Meghan McCain doesn't know, because Meghan McCain has done nothing except for read the Daily Caller about this.
As you've said many times, these are dog whistle comments for Jewish Americans.
Yes,
they are,
we
and
agree.
they hear what she's saying, and
she had to apologize for that.
But you have to admit, Meghan, that it is disingenuous of the Republican Party to go after her. This is her point, when they are backing a president who is in bed with dictators committing human rights violations all over the world.
Traffics in bigotry. Traffics in bigotry.
Let's go there.
So just really quickly, since we're talking about, I take this very personally. I would go so far as to say I probably verge on being a Zionist as well. But I will say that I don't have family that is Jewish, but Joe Lieberman and Hadassah Lieberman are my family.
Yeah.
And I take the hate crimes rising in this country incredibly seriously, and I think what's happening in Europe is really scary. And I'm sorry if I'm getting emotional, but the idea that this is politicized, I'm really not. I was very nervous to talk about this on the show because I thought it would become politicized, and it really shouldn't be. On both sides, it should be called out.
Right.
And just because I don't technically have Jewish family that are blood related to me, it doesn't mean I don't take this as seriously, and it is very dangerous. Very dangerous. And I think we all collectively take this as seriously, and it is very dangerous. Very dangerous. And I think we all collectively as Americans on both sides, and what Ilhan Omar is saying is very scary to me, and it's very scary to a lot of people, and I don't think you have to be Jewish to recognize
You don't.
that.
And I just hope instead of a resolution just from the Democrats, I'm tired of the selective outrage, and I hope that we have a joint resolution perhaps from Republicans and from the Democrats. I would be in favor of a joint resolution.
Well, just actually, because I'm not Jewish doesn't mean I can't do fake outrage and ridiculous crass identity politics. Incidentally, I have to say, to defend the Jewish people, you picked two of the worst Jewish people in human history. Joe and Hadassah Lieberman are your doorway to Jewish
they're
friendship.
completely out of the mainstream of Jewish thought.
They're
in this
marginal
country.
in Jewish thought.
And so you don't have to be Jewish to be outraged at Ilhan Omar's comments. And actually, it's probably a liability to that end, because I am quite confident, and we haven't seen any polling, but I am quite confident that the majority of Jews in this country are not concerned with her comments.
Well, I also have to say, too, in addition to how disgusting and fake that came off to me, and how, of course, Joe Lieberman is not helping your case, I'm going to go back to Hillary Clinton, Chelsea Clinton's trash, disgusting tweets about Ilhan Omar lecturing her on not only anti-Semitism, but actually citizenship in this country a couple of weeks ago. And so, like, what is it with trust fund baby children of prominent politicians who had everything handed to them, impugning the integrity and patriotism of somebody who came from a refugee camp to be in Congress, who has worked more hard and is more self-made in an afternoon than they are in a lifetime? It's disgusting.
No, she poses a threat to the bipartisan neoconservative foreign policy consensus. Therefore, she's very dangerous to them, and, you know, they're going to use whatever underhanded means they can to silence her.
I also think Meghan McCain is married to the head of the Federalist, which maybe doesn't have the same weepy relationship to Joe Lieberman.
Yeah, here's a couple of just headlines from the Federalist. Steve Bannon isn't anti-Semitic because Jewish girls are whiny.
That's kind of funny. I'm sorry.
It's not only funny; it's also true. But I would say that, you know, again, what's great about this is, like, these are people that, first of all, Republicans spend all day either just denying actual acts of racism or any other form of bigotry, or if they're Meghan McCain and they want plausible deniability, they
take this as seriously, and it is very dangerous. Very dangerous. And I think we all collectively as Americans on both sides, and what Ilhan Omar is saying is very scary to me, and it's very scary to a lot of people, and I don't think you have to be Jewish to recognize
You don't.
that.
And I just hope instead of a resolution just from the Democrats, I'm tired of the selective outrage, and I hope that we have a joint resolution perhaps from Republicans and from the Democrats. I would be in favor of a joint resolution.
Well,
just
actually,
because I'm not Jewish doesn't mean I can't do fake outrage and ridiculous crass identity politics. Incidentally, I have to say, to defend the Jewish people, you pick two of the worst Jewish people in human history. Joe and Hadassah Lieberman are your doorway to Jewish
they're
friendship.
completely out of the
Infrastructure, no bumps in the road.
We are back. Sam Seder on The Majority Report. And just a reminder, folks, you can support this program by going to jointhemajorityreport.com. Jointhemajorityreport.com for just a couple of bucks a week. You get the bonus show, and you support this free show. And on the phone, speaking of show, the proprietor and host of the Benjamin Dixon Show, Ben Dixon. Welcome to the program, Ben.
Hey, Sam, thanks so much for having me, man. It's always a pleasure.
Always a pleasure to talk to you as we look back on this week. I guess the big news, obviously, yesterday. And there's two things. I mean, we were just talking about the Ilhan Omar situation, which ended, I think, fairly well, relatively speaking, for the Democrats, insofar as they ended up passing a bill against hate, which is always, you know, nice sentiment. 23 Republicans found it inappropriate to to speak out against bigotry and discrimination, but I guess that's the way they roll. But the problem, the biggest problem for me with the whole Ilhan Omar stuff is that it stepped all over the passage today of H.R. 1, which is a great bill and should be, you know, has the whole host of, first off, it is one of those things where it's hugely important for democracy to make these reforms. And it's also something, a structural change, because we know the more democracy you have, the better the Democrats do. This is something they should have always done, and it should be SR1 in 2021 if the Democrats take the Senate as well. But give me your sense of this bill. We can go through it a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, there are some key components to this bill that progressives we've been screaming for some time.
Yep.
The national holiday, the automatic registration, exposing in an attempt to get rid of dark money. I think I hadn't really thought about the way you framed it there with the Ilhan Omar issue kind of treading on this, because this is a significant win. Mind you, I mean, it's not going anywhere. Mitch McConnell has made that clear already. And of course, even by some miracle, it passed the Senate. Donald Trump is not going to sign it. Even though he did run on draining the swamp, and this bill actually is a move in the right direction, even for his false promise. But here we are. I mean, this is an opportunity for Democrats and progressives to signal what 2020 will actually look like. And I think that's the biggest takeaway from this is like, we can show America that once Democrats get back in power, ostensibly, they will move forward with this type of campaign reform.
Yeah, this thing, you mentioned that it makes a federal holiday of voting. So only federal workers would get off, but there would be an option for the private sector. It would provide same-day registration, 15 days of early voting across the board. This is something, to have this stuff sort of standardized.
Right.
It would provide automatic or online registration.
Right.
It would deal with the what do they call it? The caging, where they would crack down on efforts to jump people off the rolls. It would require paper ballots. It would reinvigorate the Voting Rights Act, which got decimated by the Supreme Court. It would, campaign finance. It would enhance the Disclose Act. It would do a new matching fund program. And then it would, there's a whole host of ethics things too, like release your tax returns. You can't serve on corporate boards if you're in the House. You can't use taxpayer money to pay penalties for employment discrimination. Supreme Court would get a code of ethics, which is absurd that it doesn't now. But, you have someone like Thomas, and his wife is...
His wife, exactly, yeah.
And it would deal with foreign and domestic lobbying. I mean, this is all good stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it's unquestionably good. I'm actually to be honest with you, I am a little shocked at how robust it is, and perhaps it's robust because it doesn't have a chance of passing. Because let's be real, there's things in there that obviously Democrats have benefited from. But I think if we look at it through an optimistic lens, I think the powers that be on the Democratic side have to realize that even though they benefit from some of these things, the Republican Party has disproportionately benefited from all the things that they're trying to address in H.R. 1. And so that's looking at it optimistically. And again, I think the best that we can do is invigorate the various bases. Like there's components in here that should resonate with Republicans if we were in such a hyper-partisan era. But I think this bill really could be something that will invigorate the frustrated base that just feels like that this is all rigged. Well, here's a piece of legislation that literally addresses some of the most critical components of our broken system.
Right. I mean, one of the things that Donald Trump ran on, right, was this idea of like, I'm not going to have to take their money because I got my own money.
Yeah.
And that was something that, we forget about this. But as you're saying that, I remember so many news stories were about how people were like, he is not going to be subject to big money.
Right.
And to have a 6-to-1 matching funds for federal elections, that goes a long way to balancing out the funding from supposedly all those millionaires and billionaires that Donald Trump had convinced his voters, was bad for them, this theoretically should be something that Congress people, that people in the House, when they're running against their Republican opponents, can sell to constituents. And I also had like statehood for Washington, D.C. also in this bill. So it's a whole host of things like that, like you say, if Republicans are never going to sign on to any of this. But the real question is how much of this is, just good for democracy and how much of it is good for Democrats structurally, and how much of this is good in terms of a wedge issue, and they're all in there in this bill.
Right. Exactly. And the hilarious part of this is it's sad, as you have to laugh for not crying. Mitch McConnell labeling this a socialist agenda, and I'm like, never mind the misnomer and the misuse of the phrase, but just these are things that are healthy for democracy. Right. These are things that are unquestionably healthy, making it more accessible for people to vote, easier for people to vote, to get money out of politics as much as we possibly can. I mean, literally anything that is not beneficial to the Republican Party now has been reduced to being socialism. And thankfully, that word doesn't have as much thing as it used to, but it just shows a level of desperation in terms of how would they publicly, of course they can stop it, right? But how do they publicly address an agenda this progressive and this beneficial to the common person? Well, they just have to use some common scare tactics.
Yeah, and apparently Udall is going to introduce a version of this in the Senate, and it's going to be interesting to see because how Democrats use this on the 2020 campaign trail, both in the presidential election and in the House races again. Because in the presidential election, one of the themes that Elizabeth Warren has started to hit, seems to me, from what I've just read on the campaign trail, is the corruption. Right, like she is running in many respects similar thematically to Bernie Sanders, but within the context of. The problem isn't necessarily wholesale. I don't think Bernie is running saying like a full on, we got to get rid of capitalism campaign. But the Warren more explicitly is saying our capitalism is broken because of corruption. And a huge portion of this are these anti-corruption measures, so you can't get a Chris Collins going around saying like, I've made 4 billion, millionaires in Congress and bragging about it. And, sitting on boards, I mean, people coming in and using the government as simply an extension of their business interests. And so it's going to resonate on both those levels. I don't know. I was just very pleased with the way they constructed this bill.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm actually shocked. Again, I usually come to these conversations quite skeptical, but I guess I am still coming quite skeptical. But I'm shocked. It made a lot of the things that are in there. I'm surprised that are in there. But I mean, let's take a win and run with it and just run up the scoreboard and all the way to 2020, because I think this is going to be a really strong tool for candidates running in 2020.
Yeah, I was just reading a piece where Max Rose, who is the Staten Island Democrat, who ran as being like, a pox on both their houses type of a guy. And he is excited about this bill because, and certainly, if you can get a Democrat who is, I don't want to say conservative, but who is, sort of like that, I don't want to say, there's a slight right-wing, independence quality to him, right? And maybe that's a little bit of an overstatement, but when you have a Democrat like that who feels strongly that they can run on this bill, then you really hit a bill that can that crosses the gamut. And I don't know what's going to come out of all of these hearings and whatnot, but it is clear that the Democrats, because now they have the opportunity to actually investigate this stuff, the idea of corruption is going to get because I don't know if Donald Trump is a Manchurian candidate, but I certainly know that he's corrupt, and the level of corruption that we have seen throughout the administration has been unprecedented. and Manafort's going to prison for at least 47 months as of the sentencing hearing number 1 because of corruption, right? I mean, just the tax evasion, whatnot. What was your take on that sentencing?
I have a little bit of ambivalence about that sentence. I really am. I'm not one to champion the justice system giving maximum sentences for obvious reasons. But at the same time, 4 years seems like quite a slap on the wrist for Manafort. Granted, he's like, what is he, 60, 70 years old? So it's going to be a really hard 4 years for him at that age in prison. But I just felt like that judge really gave this guy too much of the benefit of the doubt, saying, what was this phrase? Prior to this, he had a pristine life or something to that effect. No, he didn't. Right. That's the whole point. You don't just stumble into fraud. You don't stumble into tax evasion. Like, this was a lifestyle for him. And the second part of it is that if this is the sentence that came down, I think we talked about this back in December. This was one of the opportunities for America to have a sense of closure and justice around this entire election. You have like Manafort. You had I can't think of the what is it? The former national security advisor he had.
Flynn.
Flynn. You had Flynn. You have all these guys who actually are like extremely high level, close to Trump. And my thesis back in December was, well, if we aren't getting justice with these guys, because I don't feel like 4 years is justice. If we aren't getting justice with these guys, then we sure as hell better have some justice lined up for someone higher up than Flynn, higher up than Manafort was, namely the president of the United States. So there's some really strong opportunities that I think for plea deals, I think for cooperation, obviously, that we are missing the opportunity for that national closure because there's so much spin around this. There's so many conversations, like 24-hour news cycle about Russia. And while these charges weren't connected to Russia, it's still within that framework. You know what I mean? So I really do hope that that there's some justice coming down the street for America in general, because if not, we are missing the opportunities right now with Michael Flynn. We're missing the opportunities right now with a person like Paul Manafort, who got 4 years for something I mean, how many years? What was it? I forgot the maximum sentence that he could have gotten, but
it was
at
19.
Like they went with the minimum.
I think it was something like the standards of like sort of the, I guess the what do they call it? It's been a long week, folks. The guideline range is 19 to 24 years.
Come on.
I mean,
it's crazy.
I mean, here's the problem, right? Like, we have, and the way you fix this isn't necessarily sending Paul Manafort to jail for 24 years at age, 69.
Yeah.
But that woman who accidentally voted when she wasn't allowed to because she was on probation, she got 5 years.
Right.
For accidentally voting. Or I should say voting thinking that she was allowed to. And she got 5 years. And people are tweeting out like, a myriad of these examples. And so put aside whether Paul Manafort should have gotten more time. Okay, because I do think 4 years, if he serves 4 years, and who knows how much he actually serves, at age 69, that's pretty. That's a pretty harsh and ignoble way to end your life, essentially, or to start the beginning of the end of your life. But there was you referenced that point about his otherwise blameless life.
Yeah. And
Franklin Foer at The Atlantic put together the best sort of like rebuttal to this, I think, or at least the most poetic. And he started every paragraph with, in an otherwise blameless life, he produced a public relations campaign to convince Washington that Ukrainian President Viktor Yanukovych was acting within his democratic rights and duties when he imprisoned his most compelling rival for power, or when his police killed 130 protests. in the Maidan, or that he walked away from $20 million debt to a Russian oligarch, or he put his protege in the pro-Trump super PAC to funnel money to him to pay off the debts, or when he was found guilty of tax evasion on an industrial scale, or when he lied to investigators and lied when he took the plea deal, or when he tried to phone a potential witness in his trial to alter his stories. I mean, when he went on and in the 80s, when he went on to, work with a Roger Stone in a lobbying outfit that helped develop racist memes against Democrats, or when he worked, to help regimes that were involved in atrocities all through the 80s. I mean, that's a pretty blameful life. I mean, I guess, I'm just trying to think of what it would take, but that seems to be a weird, it's one thing for the guy to, the judge to come up and say, I think that, we're too harsh as, providing penalties. But of course, this judge also has a record. Yeah, go ahead. You probably know the details better than I do.
Yeah, no, this is the same judge, T.S. Ellis III, who sentenced William Jefferson from Louisiana to 13 years for his corruption. You remember famously the guy with $90,000 in the freezer that the FBI had been tracking. So, what's this change of heart in terms of harsh sentencing, and then particularly to wrap it all in an otherwise blameless life. I mean, you mentioned the young lady who got 5 years. I mean, this is why I have quite the ambivalent approach to this, because, this is a system that if we advocate for harsher sentences, well, they're going to fall disproportionately on communities of color on the federal and state level. That's a proven fact. Right. But at the same time, when you see it this blatant, you have to step back and say 47 months, 4 years, if he serves that much. It's a disservice, and it's certainly a disservice to anyone who was seeking a sense of justice. The collective American conscience, which is right now looking for closure. I think we're getting to the point where we have Russia fatigue, and to see this guy get off with 4 years when everyone else around him sentenced by the same judge get far more than that. It's really a slap in the face.
Yeah, and it was interesting because in the years running up to the Trump election, right, there was a lot of people in sort of our sector, if you will, of political commentary who were pointing out that there's a tremendous disparity in the way that justice is being meted out in this country. Taibbi had a book. Greenwald had a book. In many respects, Dayen's book was largely about that. In the wake of the financial crisis, this dynamic where if you are a millionaire hedge fund or billionaire hedge funder, or if you're the one who's profiting off of all of these mortgages and these foreclosures, you're fine. If you're Steve Mnuchin, you're fine. If you are of lower income or middle income, and you went in and you were basically just trusted your bank loan officer that this is the way that things are done, you got screwed. And this is a problem. I mean, and on some level, the idea, to the extent that there is a problem in this country with discouraging corruption at the highest levels, right, of our society, this does not help. Now, all of this also begs the question of why did it take so long? Why, if Donald Trump was not elected president, Paul Manafort would be sitting in one of his 12, pieces of property wherever he had, drinking, water out of his fur-lined sink or wherever he was doing with all that cash. Nobody would know that Donald Trump was in the money laundering business. Nobody would know that he made his fortune through tax evasion, just like Paul Manafort. Nobody would know. I mean, all of this None of this would have been, nobody would be digging into this. These guys would be living the life if Hillary Clinton was the president right now. And that is also, I think, highly problematic.
Yeah. Facts, right? And I think that there's a certain point where Donald Trump is probably relenting, like just really hating the fact that he became president almost every day, notwithstanding the responsibility that he is not up to the task to meet, but just the sheer reality that by winning the presidency, he has now brought and shined the light on all of his criminal past, all of his fraudulent past in that way. But you were saying I just want to say one last thing in terms of the justice system. I think one of the biggest differences, and it's something that I'm learning now, the biggest difference really is who can afford to pay the right attorneys. And we see so many times, like, when the young lady, I don't know her legal situation, I don't know what kind of attorney she had that was sentenced for 5 years for voting in the wrong place. When you're going up against this justice system and you're going up against the attorneys that they have, and you're not equipped financially to fight back with your own attorneys, then you are going to get, the harshest sentence that they can get on you, So I think one of the biggest downfalls of our system is just the inability to have proper representation across the board. I mean, our public defender system, while, noble, it is surely inadequate when you're going up against a system that is funded by all of these billions of dollars in order to get the harshest sentences possible. And you look at a Steve Mnuchin, you look at a Paul Manafort, part of the calculus here probably was just the fact that he could afford some of the best attorneys he could possibly get to fight back against all these charges and get a reduced sentence, an obscenely reduced sentence. So I think all that goes into play into the system of injustice and the inequity in justice in this country.
Well, yeah, and not only has there been a tremendous rollback in funding for criminal defense attorneys who are doing, pro bono work or public defenders. And we're starting to hear now Republicans talk about, and even on the court, actually, the Supreme Court, there's a couple of justices who have started to hint at the idea that, like, I don't know that we need to provide this for people. And that is even more reason why we need statutory criminal justice reform, so that,
right,
regardless of the type of representation you have when you come into court, that there is no opportunity for you to go to jail for 5 years for being under the impression that you could vote when you couldn't vote.
Right.
I mean,
right.
It's one thing. We've uncovered a massive scheme to drive undocumented immigrants from the Massachusetts area in 75 buses and intersperse them throughout New Hampshire so that we could sway the vote. I mean, aside
the Veritas Project. It'd be different if the Veritas Project was true, right?
Exactly.
Right.
But when you're talking about one person who goes in and thinks that they're allowed to vote, one way you deal with that is, like, everybody can vote. So you cannot make a mistake about whether you are eligible. There's no reason for there to be these Byzantine laws about if you've served or if you're on probation, et cetera, et cetera. All right, I know you got just a couple of minutes left, but there's two things that I want to talk about, and I want to get your take on either one of them, and I'll give it to you as your pick. One is Warren came out with a plan today to break up Facebook, Google, and Amazon. Or also, I think this is interesting because of just I don't need to tell you why it's interesting in terms of the narratives that are out there, but there was a Morning Consult poll, I think it was on Wednesday maybe, that was released that said Bernie Sanders is leading all other announced candidates in support from black voters. I think, and in terms of unannounced, I think Biden may be slightly ahead of Bernie, but the operative thing is that Bernie supposedly, it seems to undercut the narrative that Sanders does not appeal to African-American voters. Your choice on either of those topics, or if you want to do both, we can do that too.
Oh man, okay. Let's take the low-hanging fruit. Let's take the Bernie Sanders and the black vote for 200. My take is really this: like Sanders does appeal to Black Americans. But here's a problem. The specific set of Black people who participate, number one, in the primaries, right? Number two, who participate in the South. I really would want to see it drilled down to primary voters, because if he's going to win, he's got to win in the primaries.
Right.
And he's got to clean up shop through the South. And so while I know nationally, I'm one of his supporters. I've been a supporter since 2015, probably before that. The fact of the matter is, it's like there's a certain approach, there's a certain means of communication, and there's certain pitfalls that he just should not stumble himself into, unforced errors when it comes to the Black vote, particularly primary voters. So while we can easily say Bernie is popular amongst Black people, yes, he is. How popular is he amongst the Democratic base of primary voters that really, for God knows why? Well, I mean, I know the answer. Biden, you think of Biden, you think of Obama, you think of the good old years. I get it. And I just, for the life of me, I don't know why they would support Biden. But if you look at those primary voters, that's the reason he's not announced that he might be ahead, or he is ahead of Bernie Sanders. So, it's not just about the general election. It's about that primary base of Democratic. I mean, the people who actually go to the convention,
Right.
Those are the folks that Sanders has always had a problem with. And I think that's where he's going to have to do his best work and not have a bunch of unforced errors.
Yeah, and I think that, the campaign clearly understands this, right? I mean, he made a point of, right after he announced, saying to, leaking an email he sent to all surrogates, treat the Democratic Party with respect, and as a means of appealing to those Democratic primary voters. He did his, swear to allegiance to the Democratic Party the other day, or whatever that document was. And I think there's I think it's Jamel Bowie who's written that, those folks, African American folks you're talking about, have a lot of reason to look at to want to protect the institution of the Democratic Party because
for sure.
of its history in things like the Voting Rights Act and things like the Civil Rights Act. And go ahead.
I mean, and to be fair, like it's rather transactional for quite a few of them. Some of the power players in the Democratic Party, African American power players, they have a transactional relationship with the Democratic Party. Like it has been a means to success and opportunity and platforming. And so, I mean, I think it's unreasonable for people on the outside to look at people who have this allegiance to the Democratic Party and say, oh, you're not doing what's in your best interest. You should be voting for Bernie if you knew what was in your best interest. Well, no, these people actually do quite know what's in their best material interest. And it has been working with and through and around the Democratic Party for years. So I think a part of Sanders' release saying respect the Democratic Party, or at least, play nice. I think that's a baseline that a lot of Sanders supporters, it's a hard pill to swallow. But, if you want Sanders to win, you can't win it through a scorched earth war against the Democratic Party, particularly Black folks in the Democratic Party, because they really do hold the keys to the power, particularly through the South in the primaries. So, unfortunately, it just is what it is.
And I would also say that not only has there been success transactionally for a lot of, let's say the Black community leaders within the Democratic Party, and material benefits for Black people, across the board in terms of some, key democratic measures, obviously, with obvious limits and whatnot. But
right, for sure.
I think the other thing that people need to understand is there's not a lot of other paths, right? The Democratic Party has been helpful to the African American community to within certain limits, but it's not
absolutely.
But there's not there's a lot of other institutional outlets for progress for the African American community, and that's not a function of the Democrats. That's a function of America.
Right, for sure. I can't really call him a friend, but we're friendly. Bakari Sellers from CNN. When I had a quote unquote debate / interview with him some years ago, and one of the things that he was excited about was this proposition of Bernie Sanders starting continuing his revolution after the election, particularly because of the amount of support that it would provide for people who would like to be progressive and go further to the left, but can't because of the lack of opportunities to have a support base, a financial support base, to actually create a platform that you can work in and work through. So, I mean, it's not only that the Democratic Party has been the primary platform for African American leaders to be propelled into the national spotlight, but it's also the fact that there's still room for more platforming to occur. But unless it is created and it has unless we have the ability to pump people through a system, almost like the right-wing media machine does, take a person, plug them in, and they're platformed and they have success. Until we start creating that type of infrastructure politically, you're going to continue to see people go to the Democratic Party. It only makes sense. I quite honestly don't understand why people can't see that there has been material benefit and that these people are working in their best interest. And it could fall back, I'll say this, and it's not a dig against Sanders, but it could fall back to one of the primary issues that I have with Bernie Sanders, with the debate he had with Hillary Clinton. When he referenced black people growing up in, basically in the hood. I'm paraphrasing because it's been years, right? But it's this perception that all black people fall into the same class category. And you have to understand there's quite a few wealthy, middle class, upper middle class African Americans, quite a few of them who have gotten this benefit from the Democratic infrastructure, and they continue to get it. So if you can't put that in your calculus, then you'll continuously be referring to black people as a impoverished monolith, when in reality, that's far from the case. And the people that you need to win in the South in the primaries are part of that upper middle class, well-to-do Black Democratic Party operatives. You have to not burn the relationship. You may not have a friendly relationship with them, but if you want Sanders to win, you can't go through the South and just throw them aside.
I will just say this. I sat on a panel years ago on the Weekend Show with this guy. I think it's Peebles. I can't remember who it was. He was I think he's one of like Forbes' wealthiest African-American, entrepreneurs in the country. I don't know if he was involved with BET. I can't remember. I didn't know this until afterwards because we got into a big argument about the estate tax. And he was telling me that the CBC, the Congressional Black Caucus, was in favor of relaxing the terms for the estate tax. And I was like, okay, but that's fine, but it doesn't make it right. And he was arguing tooth and nail, and I didn't realize he was one of the big multi-millionaires. And so, but
we're
Ben,
not all broke, man.
Well, I didn't realize you were a multi-millionaire, but I will keep that. I will mark that down in my on my phone when we're looking for a new membership level of the Majority Report. All right, Ben. Thanks so much for your time today, man. I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me.
Ben Dixon of The Benjamin Dixon Show. Talk to you later. Thanks, buddy. There he goes. He had to go at 1, and he was literally going. All right, before we go into the fun half, I want to talk about this Warren proposal because we have talked about in the past the idea of how would you break up these big companies? And at the time, I think these big tech giants. And at the time, I said, I don't know. I know there's a way. And there are there's policy apparatus that are working on this. And at the very least, this is, I think from anti-monopoly folks and antitrust folks, they would say this is a very measured, somewhat moderate proposal. I think Matt Stiller made a point on Twitter about the Sherman Antitrust Act actually having criminal liabilities as well. But Warren announced the proposal, I guess today she's announcing it. And it calls for the appointment of regulators who would unwind tech mergers that illegally undermine competition. And it would also, and this is sort of consistent with the SYNFIN laws that we used to have, the syndication laws, which first, I think, came from movie theaters back in the early 1900s or mid 1900s, where you could not be a movie studio and own movie theaters. And the reason was because, obviously, you're going to favor your own movies in these movie theaters. You're going to crowd out the competition of other people making movies. And so, and then we saw this in television as well. Bill Clinton rolled this back in the Telecommunications Act of 1996, where studios, NBC studios, could not sell to NBC television, because obviously they would be incentivized to only put on projects made by NBC television. And now, the theory, I guess, was that, well, and it was problematic for several years. And then I think cable basically opened it up quite a bit. The reason why you got that Union Cafe show that Jim Fallows did was a perfect example of like what happens when NBC produces its own shows. Garbage. I was offered it, but let's not get it there. All right, so here's the point. She is proposing that you cannot have a platform that both offers a marketplace for commerce and participating in that market. So, for instance, Amazon Marketplace cannot, every time you search for something, provide you with something that is either an Amazon product or something that has been promoted by Amazon. Right? So, because Amazon now is the number one search function for products. People don't go to Google when they want to buy a hamper for their apartment. They go to Amazon and they buy a hamper, and then Amazon pushes the product that they have the most financial interest in. That's problematic. On YouTube, if it's going to be a marketplace for videos, should not be promoting products or video products that they have a financial incentive in. You cannot be both the distribution mechanism and also a supplier to that mechanism. I mean, this is what net neutrality is about. Fundamentally, the idea that Verizon has the pipes that they're sending to your house, and they cannot disadvantage competitors to what goes through those pipes to what they are sending through the pipes.
Point of information. Sorry. How's that going to work with Facebook? Because the product there is your personal information.
Well, it would force the rollback of some acquisitions by Facebook. So there are deals for things like WhatsApp and Instagram, or Amazon's addition of Whole Foods and Google's purchase of Waze are examples of what they would do to unwind these things. Companies would be barred from transferring or sharing user data with third parties, which is everything that Facebook is, right? I mean, that's Facebook's model. So those are the major elements of this. And what would happen in terms of like how they would determine on some level which companies are subject to what level of scrutiny and regulation, Warren's plan creates two tiers of companies. Those that have an annual global revenue of $25 billion or more, and those that with an annual revenue of $90 million to $25 billion. The upper tier would be required to structurally separate their products from their marketplace. Smaller companies would subject to regulations, but would not be forced to separate themselves from the online marketplace. So you could have smaller entities. And the thing is, what is their product on Facebook, right? It is like the data. And
Your data. That's it.
And it's you. And so you can't both collect this data and monetize it in the way that Facebook would want to and remain that big. And so There may be other proposals that are released to this. Hopefully, this is one of those situations where, like, Warren again. And I saw a quote where Faz Shakir, who is now the campaign manager for Bernie, had said just weeks ago, before he was appointed the campaign manager, that Warren seems to be winning in the marketplace of ideas in terms of rolling out new policies. Bernie's not quite there yet in terms of like starting to introduce new policies. Of course, many of his old policies have now been adopted by everybody in the field, which is great.
Trendsetter.
But, you know.
Also, Faz Shakir, first Muslim appointed to manage a campaign.
Indeed. But, you know, it's always, what have you done for me lately is in this business, as it were. But
and also in Eddie Murphy.
Right. I mean, largely that's what happened, like with Woody Allen with this comedy. Like, you watch a Woody Allen movie now and it's like, oh, all these jokes are old. I hear these everywhere. And it's because they all were basically derived a whole generation of comedy writers.
Yeah, that's my issue with watching Woody Allen movies.
There's
now.
other tangential issues. And to be honest, I haven't watched one in a long time. But that's...
No, that literally is my issue with Woody Allen. He's not funny.
Well, there you go.
Well,
I don't want to get too sidetracked by Woody
Sorry,
Allen
let's get
here.
back
the point
to Warren.
is Warren. But so this is great. I mean, this is exactly in a perfect world, the only thing that's different in a perfect world from this one, where we're seeing candidates try to outdo each other with making government a tool to do good and empower citizens, not as consumers, but not just as consumers, as citizens. Because much of this has to do with democracy as much as it has to do with material benefits for people. And we should understand that material benefits for individuals is not just a function of you as a consumer. When you have this type of concentration of wealth, there's two things that happen. One being that you lose political power, or they gain too much political power, but also the economy becomes far less dynamic, and you get far less development of new companies. And new companies provide more opportunities for people, both in terms of wage increases and in terms of just opportunity to spread the wealth. So this is encouraging to see this stuff. And this is stuff I feel like Warren would have rolled out 2 years ago if Clinton had been named president, and she would be just championing this in the Senate.
Yep, she's going to make a great SEC chair under President Bernie.
Precisely. Or Treasury Secretary.
Or just be in the Senate and get these proposals in.
That's true. She will be, if she stays in the Senate, she'll be one of the great senators. I mean, that's a given.
All right, we're going to take a quick break, head into the fun half. Folks, you could join us in the fun half. Once you become a member of the Majority Report, you can become a member of the Majority Report by going to jointhemajorityreport.com. And when you do, your pennies a day, you're like 50 pennies a day, support the free show and gets you all access. Now, again, I said this before, you just got to have patience with us because, emails back up. But if you are in a financial position where you cannot afford a membership, send us an email. We'll work out a deal with you at majorityreporters@gmail.com. We don't ever lock anybody out for finances. So check us out there. And don't forget, justcoffee.coop, fair trade coffee, tea, or chocolate. Use the coupon code Majority, get 10% off. I visited Just Coffee a couple of weeks ago when I was in Madison for a wedding, and I went with my buddy Stephen Sherrill, who is a producer emeritus of the Majority Report from back in the radio days. And Stephen tends to get excited about things, like worked up about certain things, but he was so adamant for the rest of the trip, like, I would have bought their coffee anyways, but now I feel like it's completely disgusting for me to buy my coffee anywhere else. They're such a great company.
That's kind of true, though.
It is true.
That sounds melodramatic, but it's correct. That is the right opinion.
It was a fascinating conversation I had with a couple of guys, and just in terms of their relationship with the farmers and what they're willing to basically just what their values are. I mean, just it was very, very impressive. And the outfit was also pretty impressive. And looking at a roaster, I'd never seen a coffee roaster before. So justcoffee.coop, fair trade coffee, tea, or chocolate. Use the coupon code majority, get 10% off. Today is Friday, which means that Tuesday was Tuesday. What happened on Tuesday, Michael?
Ben Burgess, Logic for the Left. We ran a clinic on how to debate and win. Also, Bernie's launch and Lula's visit to his grandson's funeral. This Sunday, illicit history of Caribbean debt, dependency theory, and Marx with Tamanisha John from Florida International University. And get your tickets to LA Live show. We're halfway sold out, and we're real close. We're still several weeks out from the date. If I might do, is it okay? I'll just do this, a side plug having nothing to do with me or the show. Please listen to Mehdi Hassan's interview with Cornel West. A reminder of why he's like the best public intellectual we have alive.
Hell yeah.
Jamie, what's up on the Intifada?
I'm so glad you asked. This week on the Intifada, we speak with Hamilton Nolan of Splinter News, formerly of Gawker, about media organizing, union organizing in general, the current landscape for labor in the U.S. and beyond. And we have a bit of a back and forth about whether we need to reform the current labor institutions or whether we need a whole new paradigm. Also, if you haven't listened to it yet, our interview with Kim Stanley Robinson, the utopian sci-fi hero from last week, we let Will Menaker sit in on it because he's a huge nerd like us who loves his books. It made me feel hopeful for the first time in a while. So if that doesn't get you, I don't know what will.
Matt, what's happening on the Literary Hangover?
What's happening is the listeners are subscribing to it on YouTube, Literary Hangover. Coming up is going to be an episode on King Philip's War and the captivity narrative of Mary Rowlandson.
The captivity narrative.
That's
nice.
Next week, though.
All right, great. We're going to take a quick break. Head into the fun half. 646-257-3920 is the number. See you there. So this was sort of nuts, and it's starting to travel around on Twitter and social media. I mean, I'm not terribly surprised by any of this. I mean, CNBC is specifically for aged, wealthy oligarchy type
and aspiring oligarchs.
Aspiring, and but it's there's sometimes where it's just like the veneer gets completely ripped off, and they are literally just some type of tool of the elite to beat up anybody who in any way steps on their narrative. And in this one, it's particularly interesting because the heiress to the Disney fortune, and I don't know if she has any job in Disney. I think she just, I'm not sure, to be honest with you.
Heiress.
Well, she's the heiress to the Disney fortune, and that's the way that they identify her. Abigail Disney.
It says on Wikipedia, she's a documentary filmmaker, philanthropist, and activist known for her documentary films focused on social themes.
Yeah, okay, so she's an heiress.
Yeah, she's an heiress. Well, I mean, you can be an heiress and also be running the company. In this instance, she's just, an heiress, and I would imagine also it's not just she's already gotten a significant portion of that wealth. And she is, I'm not sure what organization she's with or how she ended up in this situation, but she's on CNBC arguing for wholesale changes in the structure of our tax code across the board. And here she is getting really browbeaten, I guess, is really the best word, by Andrew Ross Sorkin, Bertha Coombs, and Joe Kernan, who I think on some level there's a certain amount of resentment that they are exhibiting that they wouldn't. It's very difficult because these people worship wealth, right? And implicit in their worship of wealth is this sense that if you are wealthy, regardless of how you got there, there is some moral superiority that is associated with it.
She knows better than them.
And yes. So like when Alex Perrine, let's say, goes on CNBC, they will talk to him with the same with a different type of drippy condescension than they can with a Disney heiress. With a Disney heiress, it's just sort of more anger than condescension. And so it's fascinating. We could have played the entire, 10-minute clip, but we're going to end up playing about, I think, 4 or 5 minutes of it. But here is where they are now shifting. It's like they're trying to find where they're going to penetrate this force field. And now it's that she doesn't know what patriotism really is about.
If someone amasses a lot of money and then leaves it to charity, are they unpatriotic?
No, absolutely not.
Okay, they're not paying taxes. They're
of course
leaving
not,
it
but
to...
we have all agreed as a country, we have laws that favor charitable contributions.
Then by definition, it's not necessarily patriotic to pay higher taxes.
Pause it. Do you understand that formulation there is like somebody who took logic class and completely did not quite get it? Like he thinks he's doing like one of those theorems, right? Like if A is to B,
it's a syllogism.
Let me tell you, I remember.
But he's getting it wrong.
I remember taking logic or Greek philosophy in college, and I shouldn't say this publicly, but it was not an easy subject. And he was not only a person who took the class, he was the guy when you're in finals and no one has any sleep, and you're like, all right, we just got to meet and have a study group and figure this out before the test. and he ruins the whole study group, because not only does you don't know enough to kill the test, but you know enough that he's totally wrong, but he won't shut up.
He's convinced that he's right and he's wrong here. But here he is with this clever calculation. So you're not unpatriotic to give to charity.
I rest my case.
Therefore, you are patriotic to have that money. Go ahead.
It's not necessarily patriotic to pay higher taxes.
No, of course it's not, unless the tax rates are unfair. The problem is that there's a systematic favoring of people who have accumulated an enormous amount of wealth. The problem isn't
Maybe
that
it's an estate
individual
tax.
people should be paying more.
Maybe it's an estate tax issue then, because the people
it's partly an estate tax
that
issue,
accrue
yes.
wealth in their own lifetime do it out of hard work and paying ordinary income. Then they're able to own assets, which are then taxed differently.
Many of them do, but many of the people in the Forbes 400 inherited money and started on third base.
What would you do to the estate tax?
Well, with the estate tax, I would certainly, you have to raise the exemption a little bit, and you have to index it.
So the current exemption is $11.2 million.
Right. I think where it is right now, I think it's good. And that whole mythology about how the family farm gets broken up and everybody is sad, it affects maybe 4 or 5 families in any given year. So that narrative needs to be eliminated. What happens if you lower the estate tax, or you reduce, as many people say, the estate tax, you get a concentration of wealth in families, and already we have an education system that...
Now, you know Kernan went to the estate tax, right, as a dig on her. Like, his whole thing about, like, people earn, they start with nothing in some cases, and then they make all this money, and then they invest in assets, and that's why the income from those assets is treated differently, because theoretically the money that they saved the first time in their wage job was what provided them with the money for these assets. Well, first off, we know, because of the complete reduction in mobility, that more often than not, that's not the case. That it all derived from, like, he was a waiter and he saved all his money, and then he invested in an apartment, and he flipped that and then turned it into a huge building. That story does happen. But here's the other point. Who cares? Who cares? Because the context in which someone can even place that bet, assuming that every single person who owns $1 billion or hundreds of millions of dollars did it because they worked as a waiter or a janitor, and they saved up their pennies and they placed a bet on something that worked out. The context in which that bet happens and pays off is a function of society allowing for that to happen, right? Because there are plenty of societies out there where you can't just place a bet and get lucky and flip it and make all this money. You need to pay off different corrupt entities, or you need to provide, services for specific areas. I mean, this doesn't occur in nature. The
100%.
idea that you can make these bets, that in nature you could bet this money that you made as a janitor and it would inflate. So
You never
this all
observed that
is
at
a
the
function
Bronx Zoo?
of society.
They do that?
Continue.
And already we have an education system that favors the wealthy. We have a segregated population of wealthy people who are further segregating themselves by living in gated communities and so forth. We are creating a two-tiered society, which we should fear.
What do you make of the argument that that we're in a much more mobile world than ever before? That if you look at what happened in Connecticut, for example, and people have been fleeing Connecticut, obviously, for other states in the United States, but if you actually raise the federal taxes in a remarkably meaningful way, to the sort of 70% kinds of numbers you get bandied about,
Not me.
people would be on airplanes moving to other countries.
My feeling about that is the ones who leave because the tax rates go up here are welcome to leave. Frankly, we don't want them here, because what they don't want to participate in is a society that is structured around fairness.
Democracy.
We do not have a society structured around fairness right now, and the proof is in the pudding. Look at the lives of working class people in America. I talk to workers at Disneyland who can't afford their insulin because they're working at minimum wage. This is unacceptable, and I can't sit back and accumulate wealth because I simply, A, inherited it, and B, have the good sense to simply own it.
But Abigail, it sounds like
at
this
the
is a pretty
expense
broad,
of people.
You're talking about a lot of different things.
I'm talking about a lot of different things.
Minimum wage being raised, whether
Right.
estate taxes, the exemption get brought down, whether the basic wages or basic tax rates go up, and then also just taking a look at capital gains. That's,
Of course, and so it's hard
Pause
not
it
to
for 1 second. All right, there's two things. One is, let's work backwards. She's talking about a broad base of things, but every single one of those issues are completely implicated by the wealth inequality we have in this country. Every single one of those issues are a function of what happens when you go from a plutonomy to a plutocracy, where you have a concentration of wealth that then begins to concentrate political power. So every one of those issues are implicated by everything she's saying. And the other thing I would add is the idea that this is about fairness is too narrow of a construct. Because the fact of the matter is, it's completely about the stability of our society. Yes, it may be the case that it's unfair, but you don't need to show that it's unfair to say that we cannot continue in this way, that it's anti-democratic, it is destabilizing. All those people that Andrew Ross Sorkin knows who are going to get on their plane and going to leave this country because they don't like the federal tax rates, not only is it a question of fairness, well, fine, we don't want people like that. The absence of their ability to impact the political structure in this country, right? Because they're foreigners now and they're subject to a different set of laws, theoretically anyways, in terms of how they influence our politics. And they also, you want to leave the United States and renounce your citizenship to avoid taxes? Great. You can't invest here. You got to keep all of your cash outside of this country. Good luck. You're going to understand the value, or your heirs will understand the value of the benefits that you had in this country.
That are designed for that, right? Like Singapore is pretty much designed that way. The Emirates are designed that way. And look, if you have citizenship and you have certain access, that's an incredibly nice lifestyle. Those are also undemocratic places that are built in some cases on like literal indentured servitude. So not only is
and
it
the prices in the housing, incidentally, in Connecticut, they're going to flatten a little bit.
They're going to
because
flatten
all
a
these
little bit.
people.
And also just that, that too, though, a deeper point would be to say to these people, like, do you want America to be Singapore? I mean, okay, but then you shouldn't keep talking about like apple pie and elections and freedom, because that's not what's going on here. I mean,
some people do.
Singapore is in some ways for what it is, it's a super successful place, but people should be transparent about what it is.
And then they start getting really sort of pissy about it. Joe Kernan in particular, he is really mad. He is really mad.
He was so mad that he actually even brought up the estate tax. And that's a really funny thing about this segment, is that they actually start splitting their own talking points.
Yes.
And then the other question I was going to ask you is, there's a Disney shareholder meeting today, as it happens. Yes. And Bob Iger's pay has been reduced by about $13.5 million, I believe. How much of this is about taxes in your mind? Or do you say to yourself, you know what, maybe corporate America is being paid too much? How do you balance those issues?
Well, I do believe, as I say, it's hard to separate these things out because they've been woven together in a system that, is systematically favors
Do you think that Bob Iger's overpaid?
I think that CEOs in general are
I imagine you have a lot of Disney stock, right?
I'm not going to come out and say that. But I will say that if your CEO salary is at the 700, 600, 500 times your median workers paid, then there is nobody on earth. Jesus Christ himself isn't worth 500 times his median workers paid.
So what would Walt Disney think of this pay?
I really have no idea.
I've never heard a good answer to this, but why don't you just voluntarily write a check? You're worth $500 million.
Oh, there's a good answer to that.
What is it?
It is ridiculous to say that, in fact.
Okay, that's your answer? It's ridiculous?
No, it's not my answer. My answer
you're free to write the check,
that
though, right?
The problems are structural. My measly few $100 million will do nothing to address
neither will the 400. Neither will the 400.
Schools, hospitals.
Neither will taxing the 400 richest families is a drop in the bucket, too.
The tax structure so that our 50% of Americans are not living at negative debt.
Or paying taxes.
They're paying taxes. They will be paying
not income taxes. Not income taxes.
Payroll, everything
Joe Kernan, I mean, this guy. But first off, let me just say this. If you get your pay cut by $13 million and you're still doing okay, you're being paid too much. Like if $13 million is not debilitating to you to be cut that way, like if that doesn't throw you into debt, that you to be able to get your pay cut that way, there's a real problem. And the thing that Joe Kernan either doesn't understand or doesn't want to understand is that the reason why you tax those 400, billionaires or whatever that class of people is in this country is not exclusively to raise money to spend. It is to keep them from having that money. It's not about fairness. It is about stability of society. It is about having a society that can function and is fair and is serving the function of why we organize into society. So it doesn't matter what an individual does, whether they can raise as much money, whether it's one person who has as much as the other 399 or not. The bottom line is that you need a policy to address the instability that's being created in our society. And the way you do that is not by one person deciding one-off, I'm going to donate. And he knows this. It's just him being pissy.
I also want to apologize if Abigail Disney is watching this clip, because I feel like she might be. But I can't help but say that if Walt Disney were around today, he might say something like, when did my granddaughter start hanging out with so many Jews? Getting these goddamn socialist notions.
Yeah, she's a good class trader. I mean, it's about democracy too, right? Because money is power in our society. Therefore, if you don't want one class of people to have an inordinate amount of influence, you should take away some of their power by taking away some of their money. I mean, obviously, I don't think it goes far enough, but it's certainly better than the alternative.
Isn't that, though, also with Schmidt when he had his little hissy fit on his podcast about doing the whole Howard Schultz scam? He kept saying this phrase. That's his word, is confiscatory. And that's really going to be their new frame, actually, amazingly enough. It is to flip the notion of who's in an exploited relationship. Because as what's her name who wrote Democracy in Chains, which is still like one of my favorite. Nancy MacLean, which read that book.
It's rich people identity politics.
It's not only is it rich people identity politics, she points out some of these original libertarian crackpots basically just, they tell the Marxist story. They just invert the working class or just the labor class period, the functionality, and then they just flip it to the capital class, that the capital class is endlessly exploited by everybody else by sucking their resources. So it's a very...
So let's abolish class society then.
I don't think that's the direction they take it in. But I think that you'll hear that, amazingly, you will hear a lot more appeals to fairness and what's right. And what's interesting, in addition to how ridiculous it is, it clearly is the emotional truth of, like, this is why Howard Schultz is having this prolonged national tantrum, is he's like personally aggrieved and offended that he might actually have to contribute something.
Yes. And the problem that they're having is that 10, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, Frank Luntz could get out there and call it the death tax instead of the estate tax, and make it about, and then they would go to like sort of the second, the second redoubt, I guess, which was, this is about family farms. We don't want to destroy family farms. And Abigail Disney misstated. There's not 4 or 5 farms. They have trouble finding one in the history of the estate tax, a family farm that had to go into this scenario. And that's one of the problems they have, is the flow of information, and things like social media makes it that much harder to sell these type of memes. And so, and I think they're going to have, they're moving to, like, the 3rd or 4th retreat when they start going like, it's really unfair to me, to lose my $13 million. Like, at one point, they're going to realize, like, that doesn't sound so good to people who are not normal CNBC.
Right. That doesn't sound to people who are either work for a living and or are sane. It's funny, this whole, like, family farm image, because last week on Majority Report, I had on the great Milton Alamati, and we were talking about, among other things, the South African elections and the need for land reform there. And I did, with, mindful that this is like an alt-right meme, I said, when you talk about land reform, you're not talking about literally like a small Afrikaner family farm. And he goes, of course not. In fact, there might be more room for them to have a little bit more property when we reclaim democratically, like, massive, like, expanses of basically white corporate farmland that has been stolen from people. It is never It's never about the family farmer should be like a hashtag. It's an awkward one, but it's true.
And you want to talk about confiscation. 100% of their wealth is surplus value that they have confiscated from the people who work for them. So the fact that they're going to be asked to kick in a little bit of it back while retaining the essentially exploitative relationship between bosses and workers is actually a pretty good deal. And Abigail Disney seems to understand that.
All right, let's talk about some of the hearings that we saw this week. Kristen Nielsen was at the House Homeland Security Committee, and she was being questioned by was it Diane Titus, Dina Titus, and the last time Nielsen was in front of the committee, she was asked if she ever met a DACA potential recipient. These are not always children. They're now young adults because they've been in this country for so long. But these are people who came to this country as minors with their parents, usually under the age of 13, and often even significantly younger than that. They were brought to this country. They've lived in this country for at least, I think it's 10 years. They have had to have gone to high school and graduated high school, and maybe even gone on to college or served in the military to be eligible for DACA status. And many of these people have no familiarity whatsoever with the country of their origin. Many of them don't even speak Spanish or and they're or Korean or wherever they were from. And Dina Titus is asking Kristen Nielsen, to what extent, since your organization more or less terrorizes these folks, to what extent have you ever had the opportunity to actually even have any interaction to get a sense of who any of these people are?
We know that we need comprehensive immigration reform. We'd like to see it be bipartisan. We've reached across the aisle since I was first elected here and gotten nothing in return. But it's more than just border control. We need to deal with the dreamers, the DACA recipients, TPS. They're all living in a situation of uncertainty. You testified that you had never met a dreamer last year. I wonder, is that still true?
No, ma'am. As you know, they have, under the court case right now, they are legally present, and we continue to renew those who were part of the original application process.
So have you talked to this dreamer? Do you know anything about their story? I mean, I've got about, thousands of 13,000 actually dreamers in my district. I know their life stories. I know about their families. I'm not just sitting across the courtroom from them. Have you met with any of them?
I think that's why we agree that they deserve a legal status, which is what I've said every time I've testified. I support a legal status for the DACA population.
So you don't think the dreamers are a security threat to this country?
When they commit a crime or they otherwise fail a background check, as you know, they no longer are covered under the DACA program.
Do you feel that they are a security threat to this country?
Some of them have committed crimes. They're no longer part of DACA. So by definition, if you are a DACA recipient, you have not committed a crime.
Do you feel like they're a threat to our economy?
Ma'am, I support their legal status.
So that means you would support a clean bill to give DACA recipients a pathway to citizenship?
No, I would not. And the reason for that is because we can't handle that situation without handling the situation that brought them here to begin with. I don't want to inadvertently create a new pull factor. I want to make sure that we secure the border and that we are able to give legal status to the DACA population.
This is somebody who's so desperate to keep her job that she will not answer these questions directly because she knows that she'll get in trouble with her boss. And obviously someone who also has not taken the time. It's one of those moments where you can just like hear her in the back of her head going like, God damn it, I meant to write down, go meet a DACA recipient.
Should have just taken one afternoon. And
If I just
so
like
better.
20 minutes and I could have answered that question. Yes, I have. He was very nice or she was very nice.
Well, I actually did meet a DACA recipient when I was in Mexico City last weekend. He was brought to California when he was little, His Spanish is not that much better than mine, which is to say basic. He's like a total Cali bro. He got a DUI and he had to self-deport to Mexico because they revoked his status. And it's a lot better for you if you leave on your own than if they have to round you up.
Nuts. And there's a lot of, there's obviously hundreds of thousands of DACA recipients who are, just basically here still and living in a constant state of insecurity, waiting to see how these court cases are ultimately resolved. And the same also with the TPS folks who are here because there was either some type of like natural catastrophe in their homeland or some type of civil war that ended up leading to the destruction of their homes or making it completely unsafe or unviable, I guess, to live there, and have come to this country and have been here in some instances 5, 10, 15 years and are now wondering if they're going to have to leave their families and their friends that have, obviously they've accumulated in the course of 10 to 15 years. And the idea that there was anybody walking around 3 or 4 years ago going like, man, there's just the Haitian population here, who are here after the earthquake, they're really just taking all the opportunities for us. There's a real problem. No, this is just, part of the Trump administration trying to clear house of folks primarily from, non-white countries, I guess.
It's ethnic cleansing. It's white supremacy as either, genuine deep bigotry or just simply electoral strategy. But it's all the same effect, and it's inseparable from voter suppression and everything else. It's the same continuum. Let's
go to the phones. 646-257-3920. You calling from a 978 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from? 978. It could be you. It could be me. Let's go to the next one. You're calling from a 610 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hi, Sam. It's Mike from Pennsylvania. How are you?
Mike from Pennsylvania. How are you, Mike? What's going on?
I'm very well. I was just listening to the discussion today about, the narrative about black voters and Bernie Sanders' position in the primary right now. And I just wanted to share some thoughts and have a discussion with you if we could.
Okay. Sounds a little ominous. But
I couldn't really follow Benjamin's points. Seems like he kept jumping around and moving as people pointed out that he was wrong. Like, for example, Bernie's obviously doing pretty well with African American voters at this point. And not only is he second place overall when you include Biden, he's the second choice of Biden voters. So if Biden were not to run, his lead among African Americans would grow to near a majority. So I don't really follow how this narrative makes any sense. It seems like people are trying to force the same conditions that existed during his 2016 defeat. Like, this is how he lost last time. Let's try to make these conditions happen again by creating a false narrative of some sort of conflict that doesn't exist and is not reflected at all in any data that we can look at.
I mean, it is hard to parse out from these numbers if you are talking about the and I think what he was talking about when he was talking about a specific group of people who had transactional relationship with the Democratic Party. I think he's talking about specific community leaders who would mobilize, who mobilized for Clinton over Sanders, particularly in the South, because of their relationship probably with the Clintons and with the Democratic Party, apparatus. And, I think I don't need to explain to you that, when you have community leaders who have that type of relationship with any, party, they're going to be able to deliver the vote in certain in certain ways. I mean, for the most part, right? And so,
I have experience with exactly these type of situations personally, and I know what you're saying, but in the primary, it's not clear cut. That's not how it works. And everything is very much in the air. In 2016, that was a unique circumstance where the entire institutional Democratic Party was largely behind Hillary Clinton. That is not what's going to happen this time. So it's kind of irrelevant in 2020?
Well, wait a second. It might be. It might be. Because it's still a little bit early to determine whether that establishment, it's not going to line up in the same way that it did for Clinton, because Clinton was sort of an overwhelming force at this point in the election cycle in 2015, I guess it would have been. But it's not inconceivable to me that Biden doesn't run and they all say it's going to be Kamala Harris and we're going to build that out. It's not going to be the same as with the Clintons, because the Clintons had a 25-year, worth of experience in cultivating, specific, aspects of not just the African-American community, but of Democratic constituencies. But I think there's some truth to what you're saying about.
So it's a prediction that something might happen that's not reflected in the numbers now. So why is the narrative that such a condition already exists, or problems already exist that don't actually exist yet? I see what you're saying as a possibility. I think that's not going to happen in any reasonable future projection, just because Hillary Clinton had a unique position in the Democratic Party that Kamala Harris, with all due respect, does not have.
Right, and Joe Biden doesn't even have that.
Never be able to replicate her. No, and neither does Joe. No one will be able to replicate 2016. Hillary Clinton was Hillary Clinton.
Right.
It's almost irrelevant at this point to keep bringing that up, because it was so unique, and it's kind of, people show their ass when they do it with motivated reasoning. And that's why it's so frustrating, because I think Bernie Sanders could do better on a lot of the way he talks about some issues. But when you talk about it in this way, it forces people to just reject the large critique. For example, moving from, he has a problem with African-American voters, to he has a problem with wealthy, successful Southern conservative Democrats who vote in the primary. That's kind of a big difference, and really shows bad faith. And there's no numbers to support that, by the way. It's just an impression that someone might have that's not backed up by anything.
Well, first off, wait a second.
We should hold each other to higher standards than doing that.
I think that I did not get what you got from, or at least from that conversation with Ben. I mean, that same poll does show that Bernie Sanders has a problem with voters making over $50,000.
No, over $100,000.
Over $100,000.
Yeah, over $100,000
in the Democratic primary, and I frankly don't have a huge problem with that. But I think the.
And by the way, Sam, when you say problem, you mean he finished second or third, as opposed to win outright.
Right. And
among the smallest group of voters, which is the wealthiest.
No,
voters.
I agree with you. But I'm not. But I don't think that in any way inhibits. I mean, maybe Ben is just, he doesn't have the data points. I mean, he lives in Atlanta. Maybe he has a sense of what happens in the context of that community more than I or you. I don't know, but he is of the opinion that. On some level, Bernie needs to make inroads in that community, because they, in Southern communities, may have more sort of institutional power in terms of bringing out the vote than not. Now, maybe he's wrong, but I think you're reading a little bit too much into
supporting the Jackson, Mississippi mayor's race, or over the past couple of years, going down and participating in local and state elections throughout the South, advancing the cause of many progressive and Democratic Socialist candidates who now currently hold office.
Can I just jump in?
Can
I just jump in on this for a second and broaden?
I feel like you're looking for a fight that is not nobody's having with you.
Well, no, I don't think. I think that's a little unfair. I think, I want to make this bigger than a specific debate, because Mike actually has really important points here. But it doesn't need to be applied to Benjamin, right? So I think, and I don't think that. So let's enlarge it though, because I do think that there is a dynamic right now where if you keep asserting something as a problem, that there are three components of it. First, all of the data contradicts it. Secondly, it's mostly just like right now Twitter controversy. Including by mostly totally bad faith people, and then some people who are good faith but are coming from the left. And then, frankly, we'll see when it comes to how it plays out in South Carolina. But I totally agree with Mike, though. I'm not going to keep repeating that talking point because as of now, it's empirically false and used by people who are spreading lies. And then I think the other bigger point, which I have a really fundamental problem with, is like there's things that are being conflated. Like, some people, again, I'll stipulate some people in good faith, if they're critiquing Bernie from the left on social media, what he would do to answer their objections versus get a group of conservative voters over 60 in South Carolina is actually very different. So the other problem here, and this is, again, why I do have a problem with essentialism, is you simply cannot talk about monolithic electorates like that. It's actually really wrong and really racially problematic. So I think if you want to say specifically, will he have a problem in South Carolina, which is across the board, if you pull every category of South Carolinian Democrats to the right, relatively speaking, on a whole host of issues, including, by the way, other social issues, including things like gay rights, and not just African American. I'm talking white Southern South Carolinian voters as well. It will be a challenge, but that is a specific challenge that they need to address and do in the primary. This broader amorphous narrative that he has unique problems is empirically false and just spread by a huge amount of dishonesty. And I agree with Mike that we shouldn't feed that. And we also shouldn't conflate
I don't think anybody was, though.
Yeah, so I think I get what you're saying.
Well, a lot of people are. That's why I'm trying to broaden it beyond Benjamin. Yeah. There's an important conversation here. I think we could leave, whatever. I think Benjamin did more than anybody, frankly, to debunk a lot of these lies in 2016. But there is a broader conversation.
Well, 2016, I think the point was it was a different dynamic because you did have this juggernaut that had a pre-existing relationship that was decades old.
Totally, but I think the part of the objection is we just don't need to accept that frame because it isn't in reality.
Right.
In the broader conversation, there's this substitution being made for the segment of older, Southern, somewhat conservative Democrat primary voters, the segment of them that are African American, are being taken as a barometer of all African American voters, and I think that's what we object to.
I think that there's been largely, an understanding that younger African American voters supported Bernie,
and
much more so.
According to Malaika Jabali's reporting, not only younger, but by the time you got to the industrial Midwest with a totally different political tradition, that started to even out across age groups. And again, it's just so important to. Of course, there's universal racism and white supremacy, but there is not a universal black electorate, just as there isn't a universal Jewish electorate, a universal Hispanic electorate. It's wrong, and it totally eliminates class and geography, and that's what the people in bad faith who are lying about Bernie and spreading this meme are doing.
Right, but this all started with Ben talking about a specific group of people in the South.
Yeah. That's total, and that's why I'm moving it beyond Ben.
Well, but Sam, what I'm saying is just to bring it back to the earlier conversation, and what bothered me was he didn't start that way. He started with the same narrative that he has a problem with African Americans, and then you guys rightly offered evidence that he was actually doing very well. And then he moved to a subcategory and to a subcategory where there really isn't a lot of data, and we just have to rely on our intuition. And I don't think, and then you conflate that with, that's what I was saying in the beginning. Well, that's not what you said in the beginning. You said what I think is a very problematic talking point about Sanders having a problem with African Americans, when on the contrary, as an older white gentleman from Vermont, getting 35% of the first choice African American vote is doing amazingly well. It's actually the opposite. We're an upside down universe where he's being accused of something that's not the case. There's actually a strength in how well he performs universally across all demographics.
I'll go back and
and
re-listen. I did not interpret it that way, but I'll go back and re-listen. I mean, I just didn't hear it that way. But okay.
I thought he was specifically talking about the primary voters.
Yeah.
Well, and that's the other issue is like making statements about primary voters is very difficult. You know, to poll primaries in and of themselves are much more difficult than polling a
I was the
general
one who
election.
introduced this Morning Consult poll, and the conversation was based on that Morning Consult poll, which is a I believe, if I'm not mistaken. I mean, all I have is their sort of PDF thing. But it appears to be in Democratic primary voters, and I don't know what their definition of Democratic primary voters are. Are those people who are Democrats, or are those people who have voted in every Democratic primary over the last 5? I haven't seen it. Maybe you've seen those numbers behind there, and I haven't. But because I'm just looking at their their PowerPoint presentation.
Yeah. I've been following this one in particular, and there was actually some more data. Grimm from The Intercept actually contacted them directly and said, "Hey, do you have any crosstabs about African American voters?" And that's where the story from The Intercept came from. Is he went and got internals that weren't published with the PDF that showed Bernie, at 29% to Kamala's, I think it was 12, maybe 13.
It's
among
right here in this
African-American
PDF.
voters.
It's right here in the PDF. Biden has 32. Sanders has 28. Who's leading the Democratic primary? And it breaks it down by college, bachelor's, postgrad, under 50, 50 to 100K.
But I don't think it goes by race. Is he
Race,
pulled out,
white,
he got
race, black.
Okay, great. Okay, I think I know what you're talking about now. Yeah, I need to pull it up. But like that narrative, like, so basically what you can say is like Bernie Sanders is performing about as well with the entire Democratic primary electorate as he is with the subcategory of African American voters. They're within a point or two of each other.
Yes.
And which you would be surprised, wouldn't you, hearing about how much he has a problem with African Americans?
Well, I think. Listen, I think underlying, at least my assessment of Sanders' chance is that there is going to be a concerted effort. Even supporters. Now, look, I know statistically at this point in this hypothetical world that if Biden drops out, X percentage of voters go to Bernie as a second choice, or if Beto gets in and gets out, and et cetera, et cetera. But there's no doubt in my mind that the institutional forces and the money is going to come down to, we will get anybody. We have a choice. We have a choice between, maybe if there's 15 people in the race, we have a choice basically of 13 that we would support if it appears that Bernie is going to run. So I think that, while the numbers you're talking about in a vacuum, if every candidate was similarly situated, hold true, I think underlying my assumptions is that the effort to run against him is going to be also in many respects sui generis, because in the same way that Clinton was, the dynamic in the last race was atypical, the dynamic in this race will also be atypical. I don't think we see it at this point because there's potentially 15 or 18 candidates. But if it starts to get down to 4 or 5 or 6 candidates, I think there's going to be a real attempt to consolidate quicker around one candidate by big moneyed forces and institutional forces because of their concern about Bernie winning. I mean, I think that is what underlies, some of my assumptions, that the obstacles he's going to face are going to be much are going to be dissimilar than the obstacles Kamala Harris would face. And
absolutely, without a doubt. So all the more reason to not feed those dishonest narratives.
Well, I mean, but We're not feeding the dishonest narrative. What dishonest narrative are we feeding?
I didn't say you, did I?
Well, yes, no, I agree.
No,
People should not feed dishonest narratives. But why is that coming into this conversation?
This is what the whole.
The idea. Why did the idea suddenly come up that he had some problem with African Americans?
Because he lost them in the last election.
Okay, well, that's great for 2016, but
I understand. But I mean, you work with the data that you have. I mean, I think like the quibbling here is people are just looking for some type of argument. I don't understand what it's about. Like, yes, the broader narrative. There are people out there who are making, broad claims that are wrong. I mean, there are people out there saying like, look at, we have 5 candidates who are talking about the disparities in, X, Y, or Z. And yes, they're ignoring the fact that Bernie has also talked about those disparities. I agree, but that's not the conversation we were having here. It was coming up in the context of talking about a poll that showed Bernie doing well with African Americans. And so then the next step was the analysis of like, what happened in 2016? Why wasn't this reflected then? And what does it mean going forward? That's all. I mean, I think like there's...
Okay, I mean, this is not an accusatory call. It's more of a clarifying, what I'm trying to do is just point out that when someone says Bernie has a problem with African Americans, that's a fact-free statement.
Yes, it came up in the context of a poll that the numbers showed that.
Okay. I'm glad we all have a consensus on that then.
I think we're confusing sort of data
I get a jump. I
analysis
appreciate the comment.
with a wider moral justification, right?
What do you mean?
When you say that Bernie has a problem with black voters in southern states, there's data to back that up from 2016, and that's what you're going off of. I think some people hear that and get defensive because they think that means that, African Americans as a whole don't like him, or that he hasn't done a very good job on these issues. And that's a totally different conversation.
Absolutely, I agree.
If you want to...
And I don't even think that those numbers are necessarily reflective of what they're going to be in 2020. It's just that they existed in 2016. You assess why that was the case. And nobody really knows, because the polling is not narrow enough to know what's happening in South Carolina, which has an oversized influence on this campaign, particularly since after New Hampshire and Iowa and New Hampshire, you go to South Carolina, that becomes a narrative builder as to, if he wins in South Carolina, or if he comes in a strong second, and I don't know, to who it would be that comes in first, that's going to blow away that narrative, and that's going to be hugely important going into Super Tuesday when you have Kamala Harris, who, California is going to be, in many respects, make or break for her. And so, I mean, this is...
If Bernie wins South Carolina, the MSNBC lineup will say it wasn't 100% of the African-American vote. He's got a huge problem.
But
I talked to a few guys at a barbershop who don't like him, so whatever.
Right. But here's the other thing. It will be irrelevant.
When we start
said.
Voting, I mean,
right.
These narratives matter, and that's why, Mike's points are important. But, of course, when we start voting,
certainly,
then the proof is in the pudding.
Here is Sanders in Iowa. Do you have this Our Revolution clip?
Then hopefully I am.
You sent it to me.
That wasn't the group one. I'm sorry.
And he understands.
I did. It's right above the Mindy tweet. I'll redo it.
I just sent it. He understands, that whether it's just a perception that then, maybe creates reality or whatnot, he understands that part of his job is to broaden his message and to be, and to communicate that he understands that the African-American experience in the country is not exclusively seen through a class perspective. I mean, he keeps repeating this notion of disparities within disparities, and which is not to say that it's not influenced by class, but it's not exclusively a function of class. And whether, as you know, we want to, people have arguments as to whether that is true or not. In terms of an analysis of how he's running, he feels that he needs to communicate that. I happen to agree that he needs to communicate that. But here he is in Iowa. I guess this was just yesterday, maybe, communicating at least part of that story.
When we are in the White House, we are not only going to address the enormous disparities of wealth and income that exist in this country, but we are going to also address the racial disparities that exist. It is not right that white families have 10 times more wealth than black families, that the infant mortality rate for black mothers is 2.5 times that of whites. We are going to end institutional racism wherever it exists. In the White
Okay.
Now,
so
if I can be MSNBC for a second, did he say institutional with enough moral conviction?
Right.
I was sitting here with a professional face reader, and we were doing an analysis of Bernie's sentiment when he said that. And I think there's going to be a lot of problems with other people who are highly active on Twitter and overcompensated pundits.
They're going to do a split screen with Jimmy Dore's crew saying the same thing about Kamala Harris when she was talking about social insurance. Right. Of course.
Exactly.
Of course. And look, the Bernie is not discounting the impact of class politics on race. But what he is saying is he's acknowledging that in the context of the lived experience of African Americans in this country, your class does not protect you from these type of disparities. That in the lived experience of black people in this country is that their money cannot protect them from a dynamic of white supremacy. Not only does white supremacy as a practice implicate the lives of African Americans, but that that even if you pierce through these obstacles, you're still not protected from a range of disparities.
But also, I think he's attributing a lot of the racial wealth disparities to white supremacy here, which is at least as important.
Well, it certainly is. I mean, because we, I don't know what percentage of the shows that we do that outline, Social Security, specifically excluding African Americans, all of the stuff that has gone on in housing since the New Deal and through the New Deal that has created a massive amount of wealth disparity, because we know that home ownership is largely a function of wealth. So
it's an interdependent, overdetermined process, and it's a look up overdetermined. It's really, I love that word for a reason. But I have to say, and again, maybe we could borrow a couple of kind of obvious examples. But in these arguments, Brianna Joy is a good example of this, and I don't always agree with her. We've had debates, but if you actually do the good faith of reading her, she does painstaking attempts to integrate and synthesize these arguments, eliminating no variable. All of these people with bad faith arguments, they don't include class or economics in their arguments ever at all.
Also, I've heard people say that he only addresses the black working class and not wealthier black people, but he addresses the working class in general. So it makes total sense that he would focus on people who experience an intersection of racial and class oppression.
Let's go to the House resolution that was passed, I guess, yesterday in the House. There were 23 Republicans who refused to vote for this, basically this resolution that we shouldn't hate people because of their race or their religion or their sexual identification, their gender, their orientation. And It is really, sometimes it's really, really hard. I guess Doug Collins, the representative from Georgia, ended up voting for the resolution against hate. Like, literally, this should be a gimme, right? Like, this is like, should you take, should you bully children is really basically, like, I don't mean to, I'm trying to think of just something that is like just like a total slam dunk. Should we legalize fraud? Like something like that. The answer probably should be
I don't
no.
know, maybe. Yeah,
Right.
that might not be the best
I'm trying,
example with
I
these
keep
guys.
trying to find a slam dunk.
Should we have the head of a human trafficking ring watch the Super Bowl?
Well,
with
that's
the
the thing.
president?
Like, I can't find a slam dunk. But one would think that this would be it, where you just like, I'm not gonna. But they have come up with, these 23 Republicans have come up with all sorts of like pretzel twisting excuses not to vote for this. Well, it's, I'm not gonna kowtow and here is Representative Doug Collins decrying the fact that he's going to have to end up voting for this.
Just don't hate. How many times, how many pages does it take to cite ill and evil? Evil is evil.
There you go. We just played that because we like his voice.
It's because he's speaking in the same register that Jeff from Georgia speaks in when he at the end of his yeehaw.
Right, that's right. And he's basically just saying, like, this isn't going to do anything, so why are we voting for it? Hey, there's still going to be hate.
Was he around to vote for like the?
We got to do that drop. We got to do that as a drop. Yeah. Well, maybe.
Just don't hate.
Evil is evil.
I thought we were going to come in down here and have a nice time harassing that Muslim gal. And all of a sudden, everything just got blown out of proportion.
Oh, here's a Flashback Friday. Bernie Sanders, they're digging up all sorts of stuff, and we're going to see. My understanding is supposedly, and I'm a little suspicious of some of this. I'm sure there's some of this, but they have like, Bernie as a 27-year-old or a 30-year-old or 35-year-old, basically, carrying Daniel Ortega's semi-automatic weapon or something.
That's a good thing. You were supposed to have done that in the 80s.
But
if you didn't support the Sandinistas in the 80s, you suck.
Whatever.
No, not a total.
Frickin' Bill de Blasio supported the Sandinistas.
I don't want to
in
be
the 80s.
pedantic, but can I just do a 30-second here? Some people, yes, the right went after Bill de Blasio. Some people in 2016 who shall remain nameless in defense of Hillary Clinton became borderline Contra justifiers. And I would say that actually does have a present relevance to how we understand our foreign policy.
It's fishhook theory.
I agree, but I am talking just in terms of what is going to get, what they're going to throw at Bernie Sanders. The Republicans supposedly have, all sorts of tapes like this. If you don't, like where Bernie is, dressing Chairman Mao or something. I don't know, whatever.
I don't know about that one.
Whatever. My point is,
bring it.
The reason,
chairman.
The idea that we know about this and, it hasn't surfaced yet, I find a little bit suspect. That to me sounds like you have no idea how the Republicans, starting in August of 2020, or 2020, are going to unload on Bernie. And to that, all I can say is like, that's not enough time. Like, it's just not enough time. If Bernie wins the, I don't want to give anybody any free advice here, but if Bernie wins the Democratic primary and they start rolling out tapes of Bernie, both like literally dressing Chairman Mao and carrying, some type of AK as he's guarding Daniel Ortega, that's not going to be enough in those 3 or 4 months. First off, you're going to have to go back and find people and re-educate people, because I can assure you the vast majority.
Who's Mao?
Because they don't know and they don't care.
Hey, man, that's a cool gun.
Literally, it might be, well, I'll tell you what, looks like he knows how to handle a firearm.
Okay, so my point being that these stories I'm a little suspicious of, because I think that people would try and knock him out in the Democratic primary. You know, if the Republican Party has this material, it's hard for me to imagine that Bloomberg doesn't have this material, right? Okay, like just for an example. So I get very suspicious about the dire dumps that they have of material for Bernie. But as people are digging in the past, right? Like, because this stuff, maybe these are pro Bernie supporters who find this stuff. Maybe it's not. But here is a flashback from 1989. This is the year that Ronald Reagan, or I should say George Herbert Walker Bush, the year after he assumed the presidency in what some consider the third term of the Reagan administration. Here's Bernie Sanders. I don't know what show this was on, but he was on C-SPAN.
C-SPAN thing.
And because that was probably the only place that would allow him on television, to be honest with you. Certainly in that time.
He volunteered there too.
Yeah, right, exactly. Bernie, the scandal is that he was actually an intern working on the cameras, and they just let him see.
This is the closest we got to public broadcast.
He's talking about these strange things called greenhouse gases.
We face, as all people know, an ecological crisis in our time, whether it's acid rain, the destruction of the ozone layer, the greenhouse effect. One would think that the CBSs and the NBCs of the world will be doing prime-time specials on these programs, having different scientists, talking about the issues, involving people in understanding what's going on in terms of our planet. They don't. The function of television is to make as much money as possible for the owners of the television stations and for those people who advertise the 30-second ads on television. So I would say that we're not going to bring about serious political change in this country until we deal with the media, which more and more is being swallowed up by large conglomerates.
Yeah, this was all incredibly prescient, and within 5 or 6 years, like I said earlier in the program, the Telecommunications Act consolidated the media outlets even more. And the only interesting thing that I would suggest in that is that the ozone layer, we ultimately repaired it
because of international binding treaties
and international binding treaties, and because of work. I mean, and that's a story that does not get enough attention because it runs contrary to the entire narrative of like, we can't impact climate change. We fixed by cutting down on fluorocarbons, excuse me, and by government regulation, we healed, I should say, probably is the word, the hole in the ozone layer.
This is just another example of a mansplaining asshole Bernie is. Like, whether he was getting arrested as a student because of housing discrimination, or speaking about climate change on C-SPAN in 1989, or endorsing Jesse Jackson, or being a single voice against welfare reform, or on inequality, or opposing the Iraq invasion. He's always just been in it for himself on a narcissistic joyride.
Yeah, or
Unlike
denying a woman the right to get hit by a car.
Right. Unlike, somebody like Joe Biden, who had the courage in 1993 to say, I don't care what the causes of crime are. They just need to go to jail. That's the type of unvarnished truth-telling that we really need. And if you look, by the way, at Bernie's eye movements there, he's clearly not really sincerely concerned about global warming. We have a face reader now at MSNBC.
This is going to buy the next house.
Although, see, that has a face reader.
Has MSNBC been knocking Bernie? Or
there have been some knocks on Bernie.
Is that right?
Of course.
Oh, indeed.
You guys got to check out his public access show from when he was mayor of Burlington. It is very boring. He's just going around to different government agencies, including a school, an ice skating rink, and just like interviewing people about the most boring day-to-day shit. It's very charming.
He is like walking around being like, how is cleaning the ice rink going?
He's like, who are we going to throw in the gulag segment?
Bernie and kids is
I heard that
my
there's
favorite.
a landlord that needs to be rounded up and shot later. Is the Public Works Department equipped for that? Or do we need more people?
Reading the IM's Gregory from Oklahoma, the Democrats have come out pretty strongly against Nickelback recently. If they come out against Limp Bizkit, I'm going to have to leave the party. What is this about? I keep seeing this.
I don't know.
Sounds like cultural elitism to me.
This is from Saul Cedar. Hi, Dad. I just wanted to share with your fans how much I loved my birthday gifts. Free toothbrush and the new hamper from Amazon. You spoil me. Believe me, that kid gets, it's unbelievable how many presents that kid gets. Jonathan Armstead. Sam, enjoyed your conversation with Dixon about black voters in Bernie. Were you familiar with 2008 Great Schlep movement? Young Jewish people visited their grandparents to convince them to vote for Obama by using talking points like Obama's Ivy League education, fundraising skills, and repudiation of Jesse Jackson. I remember Sarah Silverman actually doing a video for that, which made writer Joel Stein comment, "I did not know that I could be so racially offended by my own people." Do you think a similar program could work for black millennials and Bernie? I mean, I think like it's conceivable. I mean, I don't know. I mean, the Great Schlep was just about like there is a high concentration of Jewish grandparents who live in Florida. I don't know if you have as much of a similar dynamic, but
Well, why limit it to black millennials? How about all millennials try and talk to their crotchety parents about Bernie?
My grandmother, I know, is a former Penn Station union worker. Actually, this is funny because in 2016, the only conversation we really had about the election in the beginning was she said she wanted to have a woman president before she passed away, and I said, I have no comment. Of course, that makes
damn
sense.
you, Grandma.
Yeah, how dare you? Well, but then
identity politics, Grandma.
Well, yes, but one hand gives, the other hand taketh, because then the day after the Florida primary, she said, "Oh yeah, I didn't realize how good Bernie was. I voted for him. He needs to be president. We need health care. We can wait another day for a better woman to run." And I asked her this time, and I said, "Who are you with?" And she's like, "Well, it'll be Bernie again," because she's committed. But yes, no, I did not go, "God damn you, Grandma," and I didn't talk like you either.
That's identity politics.
Max,
Stop playing identity politics, Grandma.
I'm sorry, you. Oh, pardon me, Grandma. That's identity politics. That's my Michael interpretation.
I got it.
Maxine Phoenix. I saw in a Tom Hartman video that Marianne Williamson is running for president. After all, I would love to hear your opinions about it. I got to be honest with you. I don't have really any opinions about it. I mean, I don't. Do you think she'll win? I do not think she'll win.
I think that she's going to be Bernie's VP.
Albino Ninja. Sorry to ask again, but you read it never commented on it. The study of regulation on business by, I believe, a libertarian study. Thanks. Guess what?
Very specific.
Guess what I'm not going to do again this time. Exactly. West Coast comrade. He may give shallow and short-sighted political analysis, but you never mention the high point of Jimmy Dore's career, that one time he spit tea in Alex Jones' face. Give the guy a little credit once in a while. Yeah.
Total props.
There was tea in that?
Colin?
I don't know what it was, but it was cool.
I think in coverage of that, I think we did say we appreciated that.
Just to give Jimmy a lot of props.
Colin from Nebraska. The Bernie rally was a success in Council Bluffs, Iowa. Bernie said we have a message for Trump and the fossil fuel industry, and someone shouted, "F you." Bernie said that's one way of phrasing it. Left is best. Enjoy the weekend, Mark.
Wow. No, he did it like, "I'm a senator here, so I'll put it this way." But
it's not appropriate.
Tim from Boston. I'm sorry if I ranted a bit earlier this week when I called. As a disabled vet, I can get caught up in my emotions sometimes and really fear for our society when we create policies as if we're living in a James Bond film in our episode of 24, complete with easily identifiable supervillains, which lead us to drop our guard rather than remain vigilant for rising neo-fascists, as well as the dangerous belief we received advance notice of terrorist attacks that make torture a logical, handy, quick fix to neatly intervene to prevent catastrophe. No, I think it's a very legitimate thing to get exercised over, frankly. Bud Court Packers. Pod saved the establishment with Pete Buttigieg. Episode Buttigieg has a episode at 1348 has a decent alternative to court packing. Love to hear some thoughts. You really should just have articulated what it was. I mean, because I'm not going to listen to it. I've just got too much to do. But I personally would like to see term limits. I have said this before. I think the 18-year term limit idea that's been floated for some time, at least in the Supreme Court, is, I think, in my estimation, far more durable and not subject to, tit for tat court packing. With that said, I think the threat of court packing is would be very helpful. There was also, there's a new report coming out, and I interviewed somebody, a guy who really unhelpfully, his name is Judge, his first name. So I interviewed this guy, I think it's Judge Greg, who's not a judge. His name is Judge.
Senator?
No, he was just a writer, and I assumed that he was a judge.
He's a lawyer.
Right. He's not a lawyer. And he was writing the history of the court packing, and it appears that the issue has been, at least in the past, and I don't know if it's really as significant now, but in the past, the Republicans, the reason why the court packing became necessary was because Republicans had rolled back provisions to provide pensions for Supreme Court justices. And it made a material, substantial difference in their quality of life. And the absence of those, and Republicans had specifically gotten rid of those, that pension package to disincentivize their leaving the court. And that when these packages were put back in, justices were more amenable to leaving, because they were getting paid. And so there may be maybe you step in and this was on Ring of Fire. People can check that out at rofpodcast.com. Maybe the idea is, we're going to do a one-time buyout. I think you get at least Thomas off the court if he hasn't. But I think he's going to resign before.
I will, thank you.
But it's hard for me to imagine. Maybe there might not be like a Brett Kavanaugh who's like, oh, I've served on the court for a couple of years, done there, been there, done that. But the $7-10 million buyout on a pension,
fucking high rolling gambling I could do with that money.
Baseball games?
You know baseball games, but you could bet on them.
I don't know.
This will almost cover my
part
debt.
of it is
Johnny Sack said he'd give me a free weekend in Vegas.
Part of the problem is I would imagine a guy like Gorsuch and a guy like Kavanaugh are probably already.
I don't think economic coercion is going to work on guys like that.
But it's interesting because that was really what was going on apparently in the first court packing situation, where there wasn't people were not offended at the idea of the court packing because it was understood that it was a way to bring about an increase in pensions for the justices at that time.
Makes sense. I say short term, reduce the harm with court packing. Medium term, introduce term limits. Long term, abolish the Supreme Court.
Ola, did you or Brendan watch Leaving Neverland yet? If so, what did you think? I did not.
Oh, God. It really, that fucked me up.
I've heard not good things.
Don't watch it during the weekend, I would say, if you're going to watch it. Otherwise, you're going to be bummed out and not want to do anything.
Check out Big Waz and I's discussion of it on
Same.
Woke Bros on the bomb feed. Black Opinions Matter.
Apparently, President Trump is signing Bibles for volunteers and survivors at a...
Is that a little, profoundly disrespectful?
Signed by 2 Corinthians, my favorite Bible verse.
Honestly, if it's not considered offensive, I think that's all you need to know,
He's signing
folks.
Bibles for who?
For
the Christians.
Imagine
Netanyahu.
Imagine Netanyahu.
They've suffered enough.
Netanyahu signing Torahs, just tossing them out.
Adam Cokehead, do you guys ever get nervous criticizing Israel, considering how aggressive they can be, even from afar? I mean, look, folks like Corey Robin and others have gotten strange emails that ended up being a function of that program by former Mossad members in private, intelligence agencies that were looking to target people who supported BDS. I've mentioned in the past that I I don't want to say that I was freaked out, but we were a little bit freaked out. We criticized Israel one night on the Majority Report in 2004, and literally less than 24 hours, I was probably closer to 18 hours, we had gotten an email or a phone call, I can't remember what it was, from the Israeli embassy saying that they wanted the ambassador, the Israeli ambassador, on the program. We ended up having him on. I think we would debate the guy a couple of times, but there was an element of like, we see you, that, I think,
I do find it kind of frightening.
For me, I was like,
in the age of like bots and internet, like doxing and lies and all. I mean, it's a little,
I'm terrified that it's going to impact my Twitter followers.
I've gotten enough threats from Nazis, so you guys can get in line. Like if I thought about it all the time, I would never be able to do anything. So whatever, I'm not scared.
Gotta be like JFK or Bobby Kennedy in the last few months. Just take what comes.
That's not.
Fatalistic. I mean, if something happens, it's I don't know.
Matt is very Catholic at the end of the day.
Yeah,
Matt has a Catholicism about him.
I'm just concerned about what's going on with our Instagram follows.
I feel like
I feel like it's inevitable. Sam goes to like sort of like the practicalities. Jamie goes to like a certain like Jewish drama, and you go to just like Catholic, like so be it. That's what the eternity wants. Then I will return
that's
to the
why
abode.
He's able
I'm not
to
going to go quietly. I'm not going to be scared all the time, but I'm definitely going to,
That's why Matt is able to have Pop-Tarts be an upgrade in the quality of food that he eats for breakfast every day.
Very Catholic,
MR's resident treat boy, Matt Leck.
If drinking Coca-Cola and having caramels for breakfast is going to kill me, so be it. A few days ago, someone mentioned that Politico is actually a tabloid. I had assumed Politico was a centrist publishing, but it made me think. So I looked at the headlines the past few days and read some choice crap, and you know what I agree? It reads like a tabloid. I recommend starting a trend that Politico shouldn't be taken too seriously since it's a tabloid. I mean, I've said for a long time, and the reason, the value largely, although I think there is some decent, occasionally some decent reporting in there, but the value from Politico is really to get more of a sense, is more of a meta sense. It is like, who wants me to know what, why? And they are a conduit. And so in that respect, it's sort of like, it's a more effective way of reading tea leaves. You need to read it in a meta fashion to get, exactly, like the AOC slam piece, he says. Ben Shapiro, camera 3 operator. Why is he so hunched over his desk? On a happy note, last week Meghan McCain cited a Marxist poll instead of calling it a Marist poll, so it's haunting them.
I want to go on The View so bad, you guys. I feel like if I say it on the show, I might speak it into existence.
It's like the, what did they call that? The whisper? Or what is the secret? The secret, yeah.
Let's manifest me an appearance on The View where I get to own Meghan McCain.
If the secret works, I want the View spot. Sorry.
Noam Chomsky,
trade off.
Vocal Fry. Jamie, long-time MR fan, listened to my first episode of Antifada. Kim Stanley Robinson, I loved it so much. Nice to feel something uplifting in these times. Might have to transfer my Comtown Patreon money to Antifada. There you go.
We need it more than they do, so thank you.
Horton Packed Court. Hello, crew. Did you catch a broadcast titan Alex Jones on Crowder's show last night? It was like watching a chimp use a frog to its full satisfaction.
I thought Crowder was under the weather for things like that.
Ew. Wait, you know what that's referring? Never. I don't even want to.
No,
I don't.
I'll let you decide who's.
I thought Crowder needed to rest.
I can't wait for the Inflow Blaze merger now that Jones seems to be auditioning for the role of Il Capitano of the right's new network production of Confederata dell'Arte, where free speech and entertainment are parodied nightly. Sam's Black Africans. Stein 2020 F Jimmy Dore and Lee Camp was always right. I don't get it.
Sometimes, guys, we don't like
You're
actually
hitting your
know
heads,
the
it turns out.
context to every single thing that's mentioned.
No. Brock from Virginia, happy National Women's Day. Shout out to the brave women in YPJ fighting religious fascism of ISIS and strong fighting women fascism everywhere.
Seriously, I'm really glad somebody brought up International Women's Day. It has a very strong socialist, feminist lineage and history that I hope we can continue into the future.
Well, tough segue to go into this story.
I know I'm celebrating.
So you'll recall about 2 or 3 weeks ago, right? Robert Kraft was named as being one of the Johns, essentially, who was, busted or patronizing a massage parlor that turns out to be to provide, I guess, what they call happy endings.
Orchids of Asia.
Orchids of Asia. And it is a chain of day spas in South Florida. And they have gained a reputation for offering sexual services. And I guess the police said, like, there's going to be bigger names, right? I don't know if they've come out with bigger names than Robert Kraft, but this is after Robert Kraft, basically became the most successful football owner in the history of football. He's fairly well known.
What?
And apparently, the woman who started this chain of Tokyo day spas, who claims to have no involvement in the day spas whatsoever, although her family seems to continue to own it, was at Mar-a-Lago with Donald Trump, cheering on the Patriots, I guess, to their victory. This is the picture, right? No, the selfie, right there. I think this is the picture of the selfie. And
go Pats.
Apparently, her name is Cindy Yang, or Li Yang, and there is concern that the women who are ostensibly working or staffing these spas are victims of sex trafficking to fill the demand here. Yang's family still owns several South Florida spas. The family's Tokyo day spa branches have attracted the attention of at least 2 local police agencies over allegations of prostitution. Before the 2016 general election, Yang offered no evidence of political engagement. She hadn't voted in 10 years. So she was not a heavily political person. Something politicized her.
Time to get involved.
I'm very inspiring president.
She has now become a fixture at Republican political events up and down the East Coast. Her Facebook is covered in photos of herself standing with President Trump, his 2 sons, Eric and Donald Jr. This is coming from the New York Times. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, Florida Senator Rick Scott, Sarah Palin, the president's campaign manager, and an assortment of other high-level Republican operators she's met at charity events, political fundraisers, and galas, many of which require hefty donations to attend. She sometimes carries a rhinestone-encrusted MAGA clutch purse. Put it back. Go back. Right there. Boom. Can you zero in on that gold MAGA?
Oh my
there
God.
It
This
is.
Asians are so classy.
Look at this woman's taste.
So, I don't know. That is.
And you meet them and you say, happy ending. And they say, we make deal.
I would love to hear what those 2 talk about.
They're, maybe it's a coincidence. Kraft, obviously, good friends with Donald Trump.
There's DeSantis.
Governor
of Florida. He's got 2 pictures with him.
These people would never be involved in
a different picture with DeSantis. He's wearing a different suit that time.
Yep.
Normal human standing.
So I'd have to do a resistance style if
what
Barack,
do you do?
Barack Obama in the span of 1 week.
I mean,
David Axelrod goes to jail. His lead attorney testifies in Congress before going to jail about lying to Congress. And then there's pictures of him at the Super Bowl watch party with a potential human trafficker. Let's just fake hand jobs. Total witch hunt. Total witch hunt.
There was a lot of talk at the time, like, why would Bob Kraft a billionaire be going to like a not particular? I mean, how upscale of a spa could
That's
it
a
be?
good question because
They give
billionaires
the
are
best
stupid. It's another
pedicures.
reason to tax them out of their money.
It's like a strip mall.
Yeah, that's a weird place. I don't know.
That's where we'd like to go.
It's a wet
Swim
shot.
in it.
Total loser.
Everything in Florida is in strip malls, though.
I
That's
barely knew David Axelrod.
Tangentially, I read about this bust, and the alleged trafficking victims were given a care package that included a religious text by a megachurch pastor,
Oh my God.
in addition to some shampoo from CVS.
I thought you were gonna say like a Patriots like koozie or something as part of their care.
Like a lot of them don't even read English. It was just this guy's ego.
Weird. And horrible. So apparently there was a hearing at the Natural Resources Subcommittee. Do we need, is this 3 minutes long? Is this going to be, do you have this one? Oh, all right. Well, let's do the Laura Ingraham clip first, I guess. And then maybe we can talk about Sherrod Brown, who apparently is not going to be running for president.
Oh no, not my 11th choice.
Now, Laura Ingraham apparently does not want migrants, does not understand why migrants leave their homes to apply for political asylum in this country. Just the other day, we had a story of police officers. These are police officers who are trained, carried guns in El Salvador, who have fled the country because of the violence. Now, of course, as a police officer, you are in one of these countries, you are obviously more in the line of fire. But the reason we know that tens of thousands of these people annually try and cross the border into the United States is because they are fleeing their countries. And anybody who has even the slightest relationship with the history of U.S. intervention in these countries understands that, at the very least, maybe the United States is not the exclusive reason, but it is a major reason why these countries are so destabilized and have become so violent as they have become. So here's Laura Ingraham completely showing the empathy and compassion that it makes America great.
Girls are being abused, raped, and in some cases trafficked as part of these caravans, and it is despicable what is happening to these young people. Congress needs to get its head out of the sand and stop this madness once and for all. If someone crosses the border illegally, with rare exception, they should be turned back immediately. Family units or people posing as family units would not make this dangerous trek once word spread in their home country.
Pause it. This narrative has been proven false over and over again. This past month, we've seen a record number. I don't know if it's a record number, but certainly a major uptick, right? Like, 'cause the actual numbers are much lower than they have been in past years, in past decades. But this past month has been, I think, the highest number of migrants coming to the border, maybe in a year or two. This is on the heels of the stories that supposedly were to filter back home, that they are separating children and parents. And there are some people who actually think that the reason why there's been an increase is because of the word of the wall, and that coyotes and smugglers are telling people, you better go now, you won't have a chance to go. Which, of course, is exactly the same thing that you've experienced if you went to go buy a house over the past couple of years, where your broker says, I would do it now because rates are going to go up. And which really has no bearing on the reality of the situation. So we know that the reason why people are trying to cross the border is because no matter how dangerous that trek is, where people die, no matter how much they realize they're putting themselves in the hands of smugglers who are not nice people, no matter how much they've heard of the dangers that their daughters, their sons, their mothers, their fathers may be subjected to in making that trek to the border, their situation as it exists now in their home country is worse. So there is no dissuading these people by saying it's bad in the United States. It's just not possible. It has been a failed policy, including under the Obama administration, which tried to do the same thing. They didn't use the same harsh tactics, but they tried to do that same thing. You can Google Jay Johnson going down to Central America and trying to spread the word that you're not going to get in. They spent money on an ad campaign down there. That does not change the material experience of people in their home countries, and therefore is not going to change their behavior. But Laura Ingraham completely disingenuously makes this case, because instead of saying there are rape in these caravans, there's danger in these caravans, and so what we should do is when they cross the border, we should put them right back in that dangerous situation as a lesson to teach everybody that it's going to be dangerous. This is just absurd. This is an absurd. If we use this policy, okay, with things like, hey, Christmas trees are dangerous. Those lights, they're dangerous. So what we're going to do is we're going to let houses burn down. And if enough people lose their houses, and maybe some people die, word will spread around that you're going to be really cautious with Christmas tree lights. That's the idea. That we would have a policy like that is so inhumane that it would be laughable. Yet here she is on national television echoing the Republican line that that's the policy we should have. We need to show these people the horrors that they're going to, instead of alleviating the horrors, we need to make these horrors even more widely publicized and explicit so that they don't try, so that the horror they're escaping from is considered less of a horror than the one that we could offer them.
Make this dangerous trek once word spread in their home country. Congress should pass this law. If you want to apply for asylum, that's fine, but you should do so in the safety of your home country, or, as is beginning to happen now, once you're in the United States and you declare, you should be sent to Mexico until your case comes up for hearing.
Okay. Why would you seek asylum from a place where you have safety? Definitionally.
To take over the U.S. and wreck it. Like, this is some Steve Bannon Camp of the Saints shit about these, like, invading brown hordes. They're, like, tricking us with their sob stories.
People seek asylum from places where they're not safe. That is definitional.
Yeah, actually, in fact, if you didn't interfere with and cause so many problems in these places, most people in general would like to live relatively close by where their families are and where they grew up.
Yeah, they don't come here for the amazing culture.
Right, we're going to prove it. We're going to put them in cages and see. It's not cages. It's really just like steel boxes.
That's an incredible formulation, though. Go to the safety of where you're fleeing for your life.
Right. It's unbelievable. And incidentally, the Republicans controlled the entire government for 2 years. If they wanted to change the asylum laws that have existed in this country for decades, they could have. All right, here is apparently there are these seismic air guns. What are these tests for? There are apparently some tests that they're doing with these seismic guns off of the coast of South Carolina. I'm not clear why they're doing them, but the administration apparently, in the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, allowed for this. I guess these seismic testing are probably for drilling, right? Yeah. And
I was going to guess
so
oil.
they're. And so, obviously all the oil interests want to be able to test whether there's oil down there. And so they're going to send these these audio horns that ripple through the water, and I guess, they can measure with sonar the absorption rate from underneath, and it's probably like, knocking on a wall to see if it's drywall or if it's plaster, if it sounds hollow, that type of thing. And apparently, oddly enough, if you have the ability to project a sound that can ripple through water and hit the ground under, who knows what kind of depths, and then reverberate back so that you can measure whether there's oil there, that the living creatures who exist within those waters, who may be sensitive to sounds.
Who maybe get around using sonar.
Right.
Oh, the sea comrades.
Like whales and dolphins and whatnot. Apparently it messes with them, but not if you're in the Trump administration, where you do not recognize that marine life should be in any impediment whatsoever to the fossil fuel profits.
South Carolina's 1st District, which is a coastal area from Charleston all the way down to Hilton Head. It's fair to say that seismic air gun blasting is extremely disruptive and loud, correct?
I didn't hear the last.
It's fair to say that seismic air gun blasting is extremely loud and disruptive. Is that correct?
I don't know exactly how loud it is. I have never actually directly experienced it myself. And when you say disruptive, I can't answer that question unless you elaborate on what you mean by disruptive to what.
Okay, let's say, do you think the sound of a washing machine is loud or disruptive?
Not particularly.
Okay. What about, say, like an air horn?
You're getting there.
Okay. Mr. Chair, I'd ask for unanimous consent to sound an air horn in committee.
Is there objection to the gentleman's demonstration? Without objection, the gentleman.
Mr. Chairman, I would assume that it will annoy us, but it won't kill us.
Hearing no objection, the gentleman may demonstrate.
Thank you. I'd like to give anyone an opportunity to leave if they would find it bothersome.
Again, Mr. Chairman, I suspect that opportunity also exists for every whale and other little critter in the ocean.
Pause it. See, okay, now listen. I just want to go back here because what there's one Republican who showed up at this committee hearing, and he is the co-chair, and he is the one who's saying that, like, it's going to be annoying, but it's not going to kill us, right? The idea being it's not going to kill the whales. Now go back when he says this and watch the Trump official, watch him clap when this guy says it. Right there, okay? Right before that. Watch this.
Chairman, I would assume that it will annoy us, but it won't kill us.
Hearing no objection, the gentleman may demonstrate.
The Trump official.
Thank you. I'd like to give anyone an opportunity to leave
is.
if they would find it bothersome.
Now, well, here's the other thing too. Like the little critters in the ocean, they can move too.
Yeah, if they don't like it, they can leave the ocean.
They can, if they can't find food somewhere else, they can just call Seamless or something like that and have it delivered to
Just get
them.
on Caviar. Do you remember that ridiculous conspiracy theory that was reported as like just news, that there was some type of sonic weapon used in Cuba against U.S. diplomats, and it turned out to be like mosquitoes or something?
Again, Mr. Chairman, I suspect that opportunity also exists for every whale and other little critter in the ocean.
I don't think they receive advance notice of the seismic testing in cetacean language,
that's not
but
correct. You told us that they get to 10 seconds interval between every blast. I think there'd be plenty of time to go to the next
gentleman may proceed.
Thank you.
Section of the ocean.
All right, guys, let's move.
Let's go to a different section of the ocean.
Was that disruptive, Mr. Oliver?
So it was irritating, but I didn't find it particularly disruptive.
Okay. What about every, say, 10 seconds? Like seismic air gun blasting goes on for days, weeks, months.
If I were that close to it, yeah, probably.
Yeah. What if you depended on sound for hunting your food and for communication? Do you think it would be disruptive?
At a distance of 20 feet, yes, it would be.
How much louder do you think seismic air gun blasting sounds than this air horn you just heard?
I honestly don't know.
Take a guess. 10 times?
At a distance of how far?
Well, say you're within a reasonable distance. Say you're within a quarter of a mile. Is it 10 times? 25 times?
Honestly, don't know.
I mean, can you take a guess?
No.
100 times? You think it's 1,000 times louder?
I doubt it.
Doubt it. What if I were to tell you it's 16,000 times louder than what you just heard here? Can you see how that would be impactful on marine species and mammals?
I do, which is why we put mitigation measures in.
Yeah. Wow. You know what?
It's only every
Here's-
10 seconds.
Here's a little hint. Yeah, right. Here's a little hint if you're ever testifying and they suggest to you a number like 1,000 times, like, don't say probably not that big, because it's probably bigger than that if they're raising that number.
You should have said 1 million.
Well, I mean, what he should have started with is like 2 times. You think it's 2 times? I think it's 10 times.
Wow.
But nevertheless, I mean, you know, this is not, in the great scheme of things, it is not the most horrific thing that the Trump administration is doing and that the Republican Party prioritizes, or I should say is perpetrating. But there is absolutely a relentless desire to provide profits to the fossil fuel industry. And so there is nothing that's going to inhibit that whatsoever.
You know, when Posadas revolution comes, his ass belongs to the sea, comrades.
Yes. That guy.
I would actually say before that scenario.
Exactly. If you know,
I think we could
he's
expedite
the reason
that
why
process.
he's
Just
the reason
throw him
why
in.
those Bond villains came up with that pool of piranhas.
That's what I'm
that
saying.
You step into.
That's what I'm saying.
If it
I'm not
hasn't happened
thinking,
before then.
you know, what is? I'm not thinking revolution. I'm thinking Goldfinger.
All right, we got time for one more caller. We have callers who have been on the phone for literally over 100 minutes, and many of those callers. I apologize, folks. Calling from a 980 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hi, this is Michael. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. Michael, what's on your mind?
You know what? I just wanted to bring up something I think is obviously going to be one of the huge issues with the upcoming 2020 election, which will be abortion, right?
I think that it is certainly possible. I mean, I think the Republicans have made a lot of hay of it, or have tried to make a lot of hay of it as of late. Yeah, but I'm not sure. It might be. I mean, I think it's definitely something that, if depending on what's going on with the Supreme Court, it very well may be.
Well, it does seem to be kind of like a perennial thorn in the side of the Democrats that there's so many single-issue voters that just won't vote for Democrats because of abortion, right? Or
Well,
being
I'm not
pro-life.
sure I would characterize it that way. I don't know that any of these voters would. I don't think there is a huge amount of voters that would vote for Democrats, but for their belief that that women should have sovereignty over their own bodies. I do think the way that it implicates elections is that it motivates Republican voters. But I don't agree with the idea that there are voters out there who want to vote Democratic but don't because of their perspective that women should have a choice. I don't think that's true, but go ahead.
Okay, well, I would definitely defer to you about what the political wins are, but I guess the point I was going to bring up might sound kind of ridiculous at first, but I do feel like it's a problem for the Democrats, and I think there's a third way that we could run candidates, and it is candidates that are pro-choice, but they believe that the abortion issue should be a referendum-based issue with the caveat that only women are allowed to vote on it. I know that sounds really ridiculous on the surface, but I think it would take some of the sting out of being a pro-choice candidate if you were to say, I have my own beliefs about abortion, and I believe that this should be a decision made by the country, but with the caveat that it's the women that make that vote in that referendum. And again, I know. Go ahead.
Listen, with all due respect, I think that's a not good idea, and I'm trying to understate that. First off, that fundamentally misunderstands the idea of why people are pro-choice, People are pro-choice not because there should be a referendum by anybody as to whether women have sovereignty over their own body, any more than we should have a referendum as to whether we should have slaves at any given time. It is, and I would start with that. I also think the idea of a sort of like a narrowly selected referendum of by only specific people can vote in a referendum, I think that's also a bad idea. Look, I think
would it be state by state.
Like women to women.
Would it be a state by state referendum, or would it be a national
It'd
referendum?
be totally unworkable to do a woman only election.
Well, I just think it's a bad idea. Yeah. Like even if you could do that, I think that's a bad precedent to set because it's not. I mean, look,
women can have the wrong opinion on this, and men can have the right one.
Exactly, and this is not a. I mean, it is a. It is a dynamic that obviously impacts women directly and primarily, but this is a human rights issue, and you can't. I don't think you can farm that out. And so, even if it was the case that Democrats would win with a slam dunk if they had some threaded the needle on, came up with some fancy notion about attracting otherwise Democratic voters with a sort of mushy abortion stance, which I should tell you, in the early aughts, in 2004, Hillary Clinton, and there were others too, who were starting to make a pitch about this leading up to the 2004 election, that Democrats should soften on choice because for the reasons that you state. I don't think that those voters are there, but even if it was, I would still think it's a bad idea.
Sure, and I think most people I brought this up to think it's preposterous, and the only leverage I think it would have would be to put the onus on saying, okay, it would put the onus on the Republicans saying, well, women can't be trusted with this decision. It's just kind of taking the pro-choice idea to a macro level, and part of this, when I say it's preposterous presumption, I don't think it would ever happen. I just think it might give some political cover. Because in my life experience,
I honestly think the era in which that people need political cover for that is over. I think the salience of this issue is less about undecided voters, and it is about the motivation of the Republican base. And that is why I say it's tied into the Supreme Court, because that open seat was a, sort of basically like, hey, this is a lottery ticket, and with very good odds of winning. And so I don't think you're convincing anybody. I think the number of votes that a Democrat would attract by softening on abortion or coming up with any whatever is limited. And I don't even know that it would soften the support for a Republican, because I don't think you mitigate it that way. But I think your heart's in the right place, but not a good idea. Yeah. Appreciate the call.
And just our weekly SJW reminder: not everyone who can get pregnant is a woman. We also have gender non-binary people and trans men.
Yes, I'm speaking in large generalities. That is true. All right, folks, I'm not going to get to calls. I'm going to take one more call. This is
there's a Gorka pic with her too.
I was wondering why I hadn't seen one of those yet with Yang.
I got one more call to take, and then I'll read a couple IMs and got to go. This is a 480 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
How you doing? Okay, so I wanted to follow up on that abortion discussion, actually.
How did you know that we were going to have it?
Okay, so I've got somebody.
Who is this?
I'd like to see you.
Where are you calling from?
I'm sorry?
Who are you and where are you calling
from?
Okay,
my name's Dave. Dave from Cincinnati.
Dave from Cincinnati, of course.
Okay. Yes. Okay. So there's somebody that's really, really anti-abortion. They've got a documentary that's that just came out. That's it's on the top of the iTunes charts, and they frequently do their anti-abortion talking points on Laura Ingraham's show and Tucker Carlson's show, and she says that she was a former like Planned Parenthood director, but then she saw an abortion and it was so disgusted she walked out, and now she's a leader of the anti-abortion movement. So she went on her social media account and said, nobody on the left, she was on Laura Ingram's show, and they couldn't find somebody from the left that was willing to debate her on abortion. You know, nobody on the. So I was wondering if so I threw your name out there. She says, I don't know if I'd want to debate a comedian. So I was wondering if you'd be willing to have that debate on abortion. You know, her name is Abby Johnson.
I mean, I'm happy to debate anybody.
That is true.
All right.
He's not lying.
That's what. Yeah, that's what I wanted to hear.
And I will add. Let me add this. I'm not that funny, so you know, she doesn't have to worry about me being a comedian. In fact, I think it's Mr. Failed Comedian to you, sir.
Correct.
I appreciate the call. So yeah, arrange it with my peeps. I don't know what that means, but all right.
Yeah, just harass me on Twitter until I arrange it.
It doesn't take much. It really doesn't.
It's like, hi, there's a friggin' cattle call for idiots to call into the show.
Yeah,
Sam
she
loves
can
it.
call into the program.
Not to say she's
or
an
we can,
idiot. I'm sorry.
I'll host the,
blah, blah,
you know.
blah, blah, blah. Ad hom. I haven't had lunch so I apologize for being grouchy.
He talked what?
I called her an idiot in passing, and I realized that is not the best protocol if you're going to potentially have a conversation with her.
No. How many
So I was
debates are you going to ruin for me?
Yes.
All right. That is all the time we have for phone calls. I'm sorry, folks. I know we got literally tens of you hanging on to the phone. I apologize. I'm going to read 6 more IMs, and then we're going to get out of here. Ryan from L.A. Abigail is the daughter of Roy Disney, who was a nice guy and not at all like his evil brother, Walt.
Apologies.
J.J. Cool, a substantial part of the value within the U.S. dollar is derived from the power and stability of the American economy. If these people actually did try and pull their assets, they would be destroying large amounts of their own wealth. Yes. Contagious Chameleon. That's like an executive at the airline who complained about laborers getting paid first. JB, Secretary Nielsen makes me more and more in favor of the guillotine. My concerns are that early primaries are in states that never vote Democratic in the general. I think this skews the selection process to the right. Dick Chat with Sam. Can you tell me if this argument holds water? If the Republicans during the Cohen hearing want to bash Cohen for testifying as a convicted liar to Congress, would they not be saying that his previous statements were then not true and his current testimony thereby accurate? I'm not sure I follow that. Kate from Upstatery. Sam, where has Guy Lawson been? He's just been, he hasn't been, the pieces he's been writing lately, he just not want to come on. But yes, I should have him on soon. All right, 4 more of these. Scott Walker, Texas. Bernie's unpopularity with the African-American community in 2016, it's in quotes, really boils down to name recognition at the time. I don't see policy issues he has with the community. I think there's a lot to be said about that. You know, as late as, my understanding, as late as like March of 2016, he had only 60% name recognition in the African-American community. I mean, that's not high, and it's higher now.
Everywhere it grew, his share grew. He's the only national politician across all demographics whose approval rating has actually gone up with increased exposure.
J.P. Weaver. Mark Thompson said that Bernie refused to meet with black political leaders in the South last cycle. Bernie also refused to appear on black media, for example, Mark's radio show. He is correcting that deficiency this cycle. You know, largely at the beginning of the race, like I say, he was running to carry a message, and I don't know that he refused. I have a feeling.
Was he invited?
Well, he may or may not have been, but my guess is that it wasn't a question of refusing to be on these shows as much as like, oh no, our strategy is to just hit these media outlets because we are doing a message campaign. We are not running for the nomination, and I don't think that changed until later, to be honest with you. I mean, I've said that repeatedly, but I'll ask Mark Thompson about that next time I see him. Local pizza historian, and like you say, that's definitely changing. Local pizza historian, I don't think you understand how internet services themselves push towards monopolization. If the Google algorithm says you're the best thing I Googled, then you're going to monopolize the space, and other top search engines are going to enter into this feedback loop. Effective algorithms with any degree of success and adaptation will create a monopoly. I think there's some truth to that, but the idea is if there's multiple companies with different algorithms, then you are spreading the wealth. Veronica Kate. Ben Dixon was talking about middle-class black voters in the South, and he's correct because those are the people who work to get people elected. Militant apathy. The South is different, man. Dems don't want to win in Alabama without activated black women. How does he pull in college-educated black women? Bernie is great. Is vote for him? I'd vote for him, but some of these folks are kind of sensitive. Democratic primary and the voters in the South are black women. TMBS is my jam. Sam, except for the Michael Brooks Show, your show, The Majority Report, is the standard independent media. I support both shows on Patreon.
Correct.
Can I get a shofar in memory of my family's bunny, Big Earl, who passed away last night?
Oh, sorry to hear that one.
Yeah, I'm sorry to hear that.
Very smart take, of course.
And the final I am of the day. Doe. Why none of MSNBC hosts Ari, Nicole, Chris, Rachel not delving into the truth about Ilan? I was hoping Sam would be on to go into it. Todd and Tur yesterday repeated lies. See you Monday.
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth and the light bar, but finding out won't make me feel any better. Yeah, I know the clock is ticking, but the meds are gonna kick in, and my pilot light shining bright. I guess somewhere the choice was made for the option where you don't get paid, for the road that bends before it finally breaks you. I guess somehow I lost my drive between the 101 and the 5. Do you know how far the detour takes you? Yeah, I know the clock is ticking, but the meds are gonna kick in, and my pilot light shining bright. The months drifted into years while I shifted in and